I'm simply overjoyed about the vision that Dr. Lucas and I discussed 4 years ago, which has finally become a reality, and Bachelor's Policy Pathways Incorporated and VCU Wilder School of Government and Public Affairs will collaborate on the vision of our wonderful Chief Executive Officer and President, Dr. Kalani Lucas, to establish a public policy institute for our youth. Our youth, the future of this country and the world, who will be responsible for establishing public policy that will impact every aspect of our lives. We are simply honored to be here with all of you. And on behalf of our Chief Executive Officer and President, Dr. Kalani Lucas, and our Board of Directors, thank you for joining us this afternoon, and again, welcome. At this time, I would like to introduce Dr. Robin McDougall. She is the Associate Dean of the VCU Wilder School of Government and Public Affairs. It is because of our partnership with you, we are able to offer this exciting learning experience for the first time since our inaugural class in 2020 to high school and early college students in person and online. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Dr. Robin McDougall, the Associate Dean of Wilder School of Government and Public Affairs.
Thank you all so much, and thank you very much. I bring greetings from the Wilder School and Dean Gooden, who wished she could be here with you all today, but I am honored and privileged to be here with you. And truly want to take a moment to talk about how privileged we are to have the relationship with Policy Pathways here in the Wilder School. We are so excited to see the future policymakers sitting in this classroom. As the previous speaker mentioned, she spent her time eating breakfast, lunch, and dinner in this building. I've spent my first 23 years here at VCU as a faculty member teaching classes in this classroom every semester. And it's always so exciting to walk in here and see exciting young men and women interested and excited in the world that we live in today in public affairs and public policy. With the Wilder School, I would not be doing my job if I did not brag a little bit about our organization and our school. We are in the top 40 of schools of government and public affairs in the United States, as ranked by U.S. News and World Report. Our Homeland Security and Emergency Preparedness Program is ranked 6th in the nation, and we're ranked 33 for public management and leadership programs. I say that both to brag, because it is a lot of hard work on our from our faculty, our staff, and the great direction of our dean that has put us there, and has also made us the #1 program for public affairs in the Commonwealth of Virginia. But I also say it because I think it shows you the depth and breadth in the Wilder School of how we look at public affairs. We have undergraduate and graduate programs in criminal justice, Homeland Security and Emergency Management, urban and regional planning, public administration, and a PhD program in public affairs. And I give that to you to say, as you're experiencing your time on our campus today and this entire leadership program, and as you're listening to your speakers, thinking about all the various ways in which your path can engage with the public policy arena and how that pathway can be what you make it. You have the voice, and you have the ability to truly guide and direct our future. And so we're very excited to see you here today. We're extremely excited about the partnership with Policy Pathways, and we can't wait for all of you to become Wilder School students in one way or the other throughout your public policy pathways career. So thank you very much. And with that, I will turn it back over.
Thank you, Dr. I have the distinct honor to introduce to you the Honorable Henry Wallace Chuck Richardson. He is a retired community city council member, 5th District here in Richmond. And he is also a good friend of my late brother, Al Bowers Jr. The Honorable Henry Wallace Chuck Richardson will now bring you greetings. Mr. Richardson, would you please come forward?
I don't know whether to say hello or howdy.
There you go.
It's really ironic, but appropriate that I sat in one of those seats almost 30 years ago as a student in this school. Wow. I was a policymaker for the city of Richmond. I was on the Richmond City Council. And I decided to go back and complete my education in urban and regional planning, which I did graduate. But I learned then that policymaking is a matter of setting rules for your habits. And I think we should do it, and I'm old enough to advise you because I've suffered the pains of having learned this. You set policies based on habits, and cities set policies based on what they want to become, what their habits and who they want to be, the type of person. And in 1977, when I was first elected to council, I know most of you remember that. But my play toys used to be dinosaurs. But when I was in school here, the Monument Avenue was filled with Confederate statues. And at that time, it was a policy that we respect those statues. So we cleaned those statues annually. We took care of them. But when the Black majority in Richmond took over the city council, as Black people, we were like, how do we keep statues up that stood for the denigration and subjugation of majority population of this city? Our mayor was Black and 5 members of the city council was Black, and the statues were up because of habits personally people respected. I want to welcome you to a city that changed its habits and changed its policies, and those statues are no longer there. It was sacrilege to the policy of condemning those statues when I was elected. News been called from Atlanta and said, Mr. Richard, what y'all gonna do with the statues? I said, well, at this point, because I didn't want to get home. I said, at this point, we're not gonna do anything because we've got too large a fish to fry. But we'll get around to it. It was 10 more years before I introduced the policy to the city council to put a Black statue on Monument Avenue, which was Arthur Ashe. And it was sacrilege at that time for someone to say, you're going to even denigrate Monument Avenue with an African American? That place is reserved for Confederate soldiers who believed in slavery, who believed in separation, who believed in the subjugation of Black people, who believed that Black people were not human beings, who beat them, who made them face a life of denigration and criticism and humiliation. But anyway, for 250 years, African Americans had nothing to look forward to but long rows of cotton, hot 100-degree weather, and the rawhide whip of the slave overseer. And when we became the majority population in this city, as a matter of policy, things changed. Your responsibility when you graduate from this school, and I know most of you will have the responsibility of setting habits with your policies based on the people. I think there are two things that make good representatives. I served on council for 19 years. I think people who want to run for office and who want to set policies need to have two qualities, two characteristics. They have to understand, work hard at knowing and recognizing the issues that affect the lives of people. And they have to have the courage to articulate those concerns. A lot of people know and are too afraid to stand up and say the truth. But some people get into office and don't need to be there because they don't have a half a brain. But we vote for people now based on criteria that are so unimportant, as we obviously know every day from watching TV. And I'm not going to call any names, but I hope you all are aware of the circumstances we face this coming November. Anyway, welcome to the city of Richmond. And I have one thing that I used to tell my colleagues on city council all the time, since you're gonna be policymakers. Rules are good servants, but they're dangerous masters. When you begin to let rules master you and fail to exercise your independent thinking and realize that some rules don't apply to every situation. And sometimes the rule will become your enemy. You have to understand when there is an exception, when you need to exercise compassion, when you need to tatter a little bit of punishment with some kindness and compassion. Keep that in mind, and I'm have to let you know that I've enjoyed coming back to school, but I have another appointment to make. But great seeing you all, and thank you so much for the invitation. And good luck in your policy making. And go out there and do it, but always try to remember, make sure it is the right thing and that your heart feels comfortable with what your mind does. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Here's my copy. You'll get it. Okay, thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Richardson. Okay, up next we have Frederica Lucas. Ms. Frederica Lucas, one of our Policy Pathways Summer Academy online alums, Harvard University alum, and daughter of our CEO and President, Dr. Villani Lucas, will come forward and introduce our dynamic keynote speaker. And Frederica is going to be online. Our speaker is attorney Danielle Danny Norris. Ms. Lucas, are you online?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes. Yes, we can.
Oh, that's right. So you don't feel like. Yeah. Oh, wonderful.
Okay, great. It's an honor to speak in today's opening ceremony. I wish I could be there in person with you all, but I'm calling in from London, so I hope the weather is nice and warm there. I'm here to provide a testimonial and share my experience as a participant in the first ever session of the Policy Pathways Summer Academy in 2020. The 2020 Summer Academy took place during a challenging period for everyone. In the midst of the COVID-19 lockdown, political unrest, and the 2020 elections, one of the highlights of my summer was attending this program. During the sessions, I was able to learn about a broad range of quantitative and qualitative topics related to public policy. I also contributed to a capstone project entitled Reimagining Policing, a model for local law enforcement. In my current role as a management consultant, I often advise businesses on policy decisions. These decisions require a strong moral compass, a solid understanding of national and international politics, and an awareness of how policy impacts companies, communities, and society at large. My experience in the 2020 Summer Academy provided me with the insights and skills necessary for making such decisions regularly. And 4 years later, the program has continued to evolve and grow, featuring distinguished speakers, relevant topics, and exciting capstone projects. Back in 2020, we relied on policymakers to make decisions that protected the public health during COVID-19. Today, we depend on them for decisions concerning our collective security and peace. In recent years, we have witnessed armed conflicts in Ukraine and the Gaza Strip and Israel, along with other emerging threats. The year 2024 will be another critical one for policy, with elections for president, House, and Senate once again on the horizon. Some of you may be old enough to vote, and I encourage you to exercise that right. If you're not yet of voting age, you're still capable of engaging in these conversations with your friends and your family. I hope that the Policy Pathways Summer Academy will equip you with the skills, insights, and tools to have fruitful discussions, whether about the presidential elections or other significant policy issues. I'm thrilled for the 2024 Summer Academy class, and I hope that your experience will be as enriching and rewarding as mine was. You are now part of a valuable network of Summer Academy students and faculty, and I, amongst others, am always here as a resource as you progress through the program. On that note, I am thrilled to introduce today's keynote speaker, Danny Norris. Mr. Norris is a senior contracts attorney with the City of Houston and a principal partner of Norris & Norris, attorneys and counselors at law, where for more than 16 years, he has provided businesses and individuals counsel in the areas of intellectual property law and business law. In 2018, he was elected to represent Harris County's Precinct 1 on the Harris County Department of Education Board of Trustees, where he became the board's first African-American president in the organization's 133-year history. He resigned his position as trustee in November 2023 to run for Texas House District 142 in the 2024 election. Mr. Norris served as an administrator and instructor of law for more than 12 years at Thurgood Marshall School of Law, where he received a Faculty Appreciation Award in 2011 and taught students that have gone on to become successful lawyers, judges, politicians, business leaders, and a variety of other noble professions. Mr. Norris has a Bachelor of Science degree in Chemical Engineering from the University of Houston, a Master of Science from the University of North Texas, and a Juris Doctor degree from Texas Southern University. He is licensed to practice before the State Bar of Texas and the United States Patent and Trademark Office. Mr. Norris is also a senior fellow of the Houston chapter of the American Leadership Forum and Leadership Houston, an advisor for the Houston Professionals chapter of the National Society of Black Engineers, a past president of the Houston Lawyers Association, and a past chair of the African American Lawyers section for the State Bar of Texas. He has published several articles on a variety of topics, covering both international and domestic issues. Notably, Mr. Norris, along with his 2010 Law Review article discussing gentrification in Houston's Third Ward, was featured in the Houston Press in July 2011. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to Mr. Danny Norris.
Thank you. While we're getting set up, I'll let you know we are very warm here in Richmond, Virginia. So I'm not sure if you hear me, but yes, we are very warm here in Richmond, Virginia, to say the least. It's a very warm day, to say the least. So thank you for that introduction. I think my presentation is getting pulled up so I can talk a little bit. I figured y'all want, I'm sure y'all love to see my pretty face, but I'm pretty sure y'all want to see something. I'm somebody who gets zones out pretty quickly, so I'll at least give you something to focus on other than my flapping lips while I'm up here. So, ready? All right. So, what I'm going to do, I'm going to talk to y'all a little bit about. I'm going to give you a little bit of background on myself, and a little bit of my history, with policy, my interaction with policy as an educator, as a policymaker, and then I'll talk to you a little bit about some tips, some points of advice for you. And so for the next 3 hours, I'll tell you how. No, I was told I got 15 to 20 minutes, so let me go ahead and jump into this real quick. So I'm going to tell you all my origin story, and I'm not a superhero, so just in case you thought that. But my origin story actually goes back to not too far from here, Norfolk. So maybe the last several years, a cousin of mine actually has helped me kind of dig into our family history. And as a matter of fact, speaking of family, shout out to my cousin Mike. Over in the back corner, who actually introduced me to Dr. Lucas and how I ended up before you today. So, but my origin story actually goes back to the 1600s, down in Norfolk. That's the earliest point I can find that I have an ancestor that came to this country, 1639, about a century and a half before the United States became the United States, right? So we're talking about, 20 years after Jamestown. I think Jamestown, any history experts in here? Jamestown, I think it was early, like 1609 or something like that. So 1609. I knew somebody back here, So about 30 years after Jamestown is pretty much where my story starts in this country. For a lot of us that are African American, a lot of our stories, and this is the line that runs through England. Our European lines are pretty easily traced because records are a little bit better. The African American lines are a little trickier, and we'll talk about that in a second. But that was my, so the first, my oldest ancestor I can find that was actually born on the soil was Richard Hargrave Sr. He was my 9th great grandfather. So he was born in Norfolk, Virginia in 1639. That makes me a 12th generation American. So anybody who always talks about, you're American enough, I was like, unless you're native or you have some Choctaw or something in your ancestry, good luck on out American me, so they say. So again, this is about a century and a half before the country began. One of the earliest records I can find for my African American line was around a couple hundred years ago. I found my 4th great grandmother on the Free Negro Registry about 70, 80 miles south here in Southampton County, Virginia. For those who don't know, Southampton County, Virginia is actually the birthplace of a young man named Dred Scott. You guys have probably heard of that court case in your history classes. Eventually, he was a slave. They moved to Missouri and it ended up being one of the Supreme Court cases that actually was a precursor to the Civil War. But he was also born in Southampton County, Virginia. He would have been a contemporary of my 4th great grandmother. Also in that county, that's where the Nat Turner Rebellion happened. For those who are also fans of history, I think Jonathan Parker did a Birth of a Nation movie, a recap of that specific incident. But that was also took place in Southampton County, Virginia. And actually, Nat Turner was hanged right there in the courthouse in Southampton County, Virginia. But that is where I was able to find one of my earlier ancestors, and her name was Judy Crocker, and that was pretty much a good part of where my family came from. So at least to about 100 years, ago, most of my family has been. That line of my family specific has been around this area. So within maybe 50 or 100 miles of this area is pretty much where my family hung out for about 2.5 centuries. And about 100 years ago, that changed with, let's see. Let me see. Okay. There we go. That changed with these two individuals up here. These are my great grandparents. This is my great grandfather, Shirley Crocker, and my great grandmother, Pearl Crocker. Yeah, my grandfather was named Shirley. We haven't figured out why they named him Shirley. My grandmother said she used to get teased as a kid. Her dad was named Shirley. But these are my grandparents. They were part of what you would call the Great Migration. That was the 6 million African Americans who left the South and decided that they were going to go to cities up north. So after 2.5 centuries of hanging out in these parts, Grandma and Grandpa decided to move to Pittsburgh. And that is where their firstborn, that young lady that's being held right there, that is my grandmother. And just to let you know that a nod to that, they were actually not necessarily against the area they moved from. They actually named her Virginia. So that's why my grandmother, we call her Grandma Jenna, but they named her after the place they were born. So that is part of the story that happened there. So Grandma Jenna was born in Pittsburgh, and she married the gentleman on the left, my grandfather, Grandpa Bill, or Uncle Snooty to Cousin Mike, but that's Grandpa Snooty, so to speak. So these are my folks. They are my grandparents. They were married at the tender age of 20. I guess when I was 20, I wasn't thinking about marriage very much. I don't know about y'all. Y'all, anybody here 20 yet? Okay. Has anybody think about marriage yet? Probably not. Okay. Don't rush. Uh-oh, sorry. Going too fast. Sorry, y'all. Going too fast. Sorry. Let me go back. Let me click. So Grandma and Grandpa got married in Pittsburgh. They had 2 sons. Grandpa went to Korea. He came back, ended up opening a gas station in Chicago. So they moved west to Chicago. And then they had one more child, that little young lady down at the bottom. That's my mama. And it's very scary because I have a niece that my niece is 8 and she looks just like this. So it is very weird. The genes run very heavy in the family. So, but that is where they ended up. And then my mom met this big head guy to the left. That'd be my dad. He was a transplant from Mississippi. So dad was born in Starkville, Mississippi, where Mississippi State University is. They moved to Chicago. They were towards the end of the Great Migration. My grandparents decided to move their family of 5 from Starkville, Mississippi, up to Chicago, Illinois, to have more opportunity. So dad was born. Dad came up there. They married, and that little sexy young gentleman at the bottom, that would be yours truly. So, okay. So, why does all that matter? What is this? Okay, that's great. Thank you for telling us your little origin story. What does that matter? Well, a lot of this was largely influenced by policy. Jim Crow pushed many African Americans from the South up to the North. I mean, many have been here forever, like I said, at least a couple hundred years at some point for many people, and all of a sudden, it was a time to move. So in the 20s, in the early part of the 1900s, when the Jim Crow, when the Black codes became a thing, when a lot of unchecked violence happened, and opportunity specifically, a lot of people decided to move and leave the South and go to cities up north. So that's how a lot of us ended up in places like Chicago or Pittsburgh. That's what pushed my great-grandparents from Southampton County, Virginia to Pittsburgh. That's what pushed my grandparents from Mississippi up to Chicago. Also, another thing to note, I would be at least the 12th generation American that I can find so far. But I am actually the very first generation that was born with all my legal rights. That, as crazy as that sounds, because people always laugh, sometimes people say, well, these things happened so long ago. Well, I tell people, no, actually, my dad remembers when he hurt his foot, when they visited Mississippi in the summer, he remembers having to go to the doctor's office, and when he tried to go to the front door, all of the family said, oh, no, you can't do that. You gotta go to the other side, the color entrance. And he was like, well, we're going to see the same doctor, right? And he remembers going to that side of the doctor's office where it was just dirtier. They didn't clean it. They didn't typically clean it or anything, but it was the same doctor. The policy was you have to go to this side. But this was not forever ago. This is my dad, the guy who actually, the big head guy, the picture I had, that was the guy. So it's interesting in that regards. But these things are these are things that happen, and these things are kind of part of things that actually inform me. I mean, of course, they inform you on things like race and policy and economics, but also even things that are more current, like immigration. Typically, people don't leave when they are comfortable. Typically, people, when you're comfortable in a place, you kind of shut up. It's like, I'm good here. I'm feeling good. Even jobs. When people are comfortable in their jobs, they hang out forever, right? When they get uncomfortable, they say, you know what? I'm gonna get another job. I'm gonna go to a different place. If you've ever had any friends that transfer schools because they had something going on, people tend to leave when they're not comfortable. So one of the things when it comes to policy too, if you notice a whole group of people leaving, you probably have some policy issues. And when it comes to our country, one of the things that, I live in Texas, where they're talking about a wall and all these things. But what a lot of people are not talking about, why are these people leaving? Why are these people coming here? Are we looking upstream? If it's a country that like Haiti, the U.S. has had some big policy initiatives that have not helped Haiti necessarily, places like that. So is our country responsible for destabilizing some of these countries? Are we having those discussions? And if we are we trying to help address some of those issues before they end up on our border? So these are things to think about. These are things that these are the lenses that I put on when I think about policy. Not only, I'm grateful to be here, so I'm not saying that these policies were so bad. I think we think of things a lot of times as good and bad, but I think of things in terms of motivation. Why do people do the things they do? And what can we do if things are not necessarily going right? What can we do to actually make those things change? So these are the things that this is kind of how I think through these things on these topics. So now that you learned a little bit about me, let's talk a little bit about my experience with public policy. So what policy and public service. So I'm going to tell you all a little bit about my time as an educator, as an agitator, a policymaker, and a little bit as a public servant. So education was a place that I stumbled into twice. So nice, I stumbled to it twice. So the first time was when I finished undergrad. I was finished with my chemical engineering degree. And with engineering markets, it's very cyclical. So when especially chemical engineering, that means oil and gas, when it's doing great, they have jobs for everybody. When it's not doing great, they have no jobs for anybody. So I happened to be graduating undergrad in 2003. It was a time where they had no jobs for anybody. I think, let me quit bumping this thing. I think they said the two classes before mine, everybody had a job. Like it was like 40 people who graduated from our program, everybody had a job. The class before me, it was like 20, about half the class had a job. My class, out of the 40 of us, like 2 people had a job. So it was a down part of the market. People were deciding they wanted to hang out and spend another year or two in undergrad and just to graduate. I was like, no, forget that. I'm not going to stay in engineering forever. I'm going to go to law school. And then I finished law school in 2007, took the patent bar in 2008. And then 2008 was a pretty bad time for everybody. You guys heard about that recession. There's the Great Depression, there's the Great Recession. So I graduated when I got my law license in 2007. My plan, I said, I'm going to just do this education thing for another year while I take the patent bar, and 2008 happened, and then that was a little different. But it was one of those things I stumbled to. I said I was going to do it for a year. Next thing I know, 12 years later, I was still teaching law students. It was a joy. It's interesting too, because like with most educators, you think of pre-K, you think of people who teach kids, but when you teach lawyers, It's different, first of all, because they're grown already, so meaning you could be out, like having a drink, and they could be sitting right next to you and having a drink next to you. It's always weird. Then people want to act like you're their pastor, like, oh my gosh, Professor Norris, you should, I'm sorry, you see me over here, dance with this boy. It's like, look, I'm not your pastor, just go ahead and enjoy yourself. I be grown, but just make sure you have my work done. That's kind of the situation you find yourself into. But it was actually a joy. And like was mentioned in my bio, it's very good when I get to watch my students go out there and do things. When I get to call them the honorable, a couple of my students actually ran with me when I ran in 2018. So I had a couple of my students actually that were elected at the same time I was elected in 2018 that became judges. So very good in that regards. I also found the power of the pen. That was one of the things that I did not think about at all until I started writing articles. One of the things you realize is when you write law review articles specifically, a lot of policymakers actually look to them for because their research, you take your time to research these different topics, and then you put them in the form of a paper, and you have all the research done for them, and you kind of explain, well, this is the position that I would take if I were doing this, and this is a possible solution for this specific issue. So I wrote mine on things like gentrification. I wrote it on like some sports issues, some immigration issues, but that is one of those things all the way up to the US Supreme Court can look at this law review article if they like your argument and say, hey, that was not a bad position, and you actually have a research. We may actually try that. So, and same thing with Congress. Actually, one of the professors that used to teach for me at TSU, one of his articles was one of the basis for the Dobbs Act. So, the Dobbs-Franklin, what's it called? The post when the recession happened, the Dobbs-Franklin. Okay, I'm sorry, I'm messing it up. The Dobbs-Franklin was actually one of the formulas they put in there was based on one of the professors at TSU. He was a former IBM engineer and turned lawyer, and he said, you should put this and tie this to these specific matrices. And they actually decided not a bad part, not a bad idea. So but the law review actually helps shape policy because you think things through, you get the research, and as a former policymakers, a lot of times they don't take a lot of time to do all the research. They like to look at people who've already done the work and say, oh, that's not a bad idea. Let me take that. So those are some things that I enjoyed in that regards. So that was me as the educator. As a policy, as an agitator, yeah, I did some agitations over the years. The first protest I remember when I was 10, my mom used to work at the University of Illinois, Chicago when I was young, before we moved from Chicago to Texas. And they had a protest for Nelson Mandela. I don't know if you might have heard of it in your history books, but I remember when I was like, okay, there's something called apartheid going on in South Africa. All I know is they say this guy named Mandela is hot. And so she worked on the university campus. We actually went to the protest, and that's the first one I can remember. Also went to things like, I remember going to the Million Man March as a kid, or as a 15, that's one of the first times I started driving. Actually, we went to the Million Family March in 2000. Anybody heard of Paul Wall? Y'all know who that is? Paul Wall. So yeah, Paul Wall actually, we went to U of H together, which is weird. So yeah, he's you've seen him. It was weird because I was like, who is this? They say he's a rapper, and I was like, this. As far as I know, it was like this white dude on campus with gold teeth and cornrows, and they say he's hot in these streets. But we ended up going to school together. We went to DC for some other things, and then also during 03, right when I was finishing up school, I decided to. I actually went to the Greta B. Bollinger case. That was in DC. That was when they were talking about affirmative action. This was back in 03. They just overturned that recently, but I pulled this little article up. I went and found the actual quote, and my quote to the Chronicle, the Houston Chronicle at the time, said the cancellation of affirmative action is ludicrous. So I only brought that up to say that you don't have to be very articulate if you want to do some agitating. I just decided that at the time I think I didn't get much sleep at the time, but that was one of the things that I brought up. And interestingly enough, when they overturned this case last year, a reporter actually found me. She's like, I saw that you were advocating U of H, and now I see that you're actually on the school board. So what do you think about this affirmative action thing? So don't just say what you're going to say and be an agitator, and eventually you'll find better ways. Because I think by the time I came back, I had a more articulate stance on affirmative action. But at the time, I just said it was ludicrous to cancel affirmative action. One other thing too, this in 2021, Texas actually passed a measure of voting restrictions. Ultimately, what happened in 2020, a couple things happened. First of all, the elections, things like Georgia, where Georgia flips from Republican to Democrat, right, during the 2020 election. Also, what happens in Houston is that the boards of the policymakers switch over. Well, now there's a majority of Democrats on the local, in Harris County, what they end up doing is tripling the funding for the voting center. So they start doing 24-hour voting, drive-through voting. They start doing all these voting initiatives where you can come drop your ballots off. And then in 2021, when the legislature went back in session, they said, okay, all that's now illegal because they were like, Harris County, y'all are too blue, and we don't want y'all flipping this state. It's just like they did in Georgia. So Georgia did a lot of voter restrictions. They did the same thing in Texas. So in 2021, when those laws came out, I was a drive-through voter. This was during the pandemic period. My wife has high blood pressure, so that puts her in a high category for things like COVID. So we did drive-through voting, and so I became a plaintiff in the lawsuit that is pending against this. Still currently pending against Texas. It takes a while for lawsuits, but it is pending currently in Texas against Texas right now. It's me, a number of other plaintiffs, including like the Texas chapter of the NAACP, and we're all suing Texas for that. One of those, some of those restrictions. Interestingly enough, maybe a few months ago, a cousin of mine sent me this. He sent me an article about my great aunt. Lois Hunley, and she actually sued the school district for Alexandria, not too far from DC. And she actually eventually was fired. She was a cook for the school district. Thankfully, one of my calculations when I decided to sue Texas was I don't work for the state. I don't work for the university anymore, which is a state institution. So I felt comfortable with that. But she actually was working for the school district. They ultimately fired her for it. And she ended up getting another job. It wasn't an issue. She could cook. That wasn't a question. But if you ever get a chance, there's a movie called Remember the Titans. This is when Denzel was a heartthrob in the 90s. By the time the 2000s came, he started transitioning to Uncle Denzel. Y'all probably know he's Uncle Denzel these days. But Remember the Titans was one of those movies he started transitioning, and they had a movie about the Alexandria school district. It was about a football team, but the football team was in Alexandria when they were integrating, and it was kind of a throwback to that time. But one of the reasons they were able to integrate is because people like Lois was one of the people who sued the industry. But you'll see Uncle Denzel on there. You can see a young Ryan Gosling. It's very interesting. If you get a chance, check that out. But that was an interesting little keynote, a little note there. So also one of the things I got a chance to do too is become a policymaker. That was one of the more interesting. I decided to actually run for the board, not because I was just serious. I really don't care for elections necessarily. But I felt at a certain point, especially after like 2016 election and some other things, I just felt like, okay, I can do more than just talk trash on Facebook. That's what I've been doing at this point. I shake my fist on Facebook. I talk a little trash. Me and a few people get into it in the comment section. And at the end of the day, what have I done? So I decided to run for the county school board back in 2018. This is where I represented a quarter of Harris County, which is a quarter of Harris County is like just under 1.2 million people. And yeah, I was able to become the first African American board president. Some other things I was able to do, I was able to help, we do business programs. One of the things we realized when I got on the board was that there was a study that was done by the county saying that all of these, I think Harris County is like 20-25% African American, about 40% Hispanic, maybe 30% white, about 10% Asian. And I think, I don't know if that all that maths, but something like that. It's double digits of everybody. So we have a little bit of everybody, but when they did the contracts to figure out who the county was getting contracts to, I think they said that it was like 0.5% were going to African Americans, maybe 6% total were going to all women and minorities business total. So even though I think, they said that most of the firms were majority white male, and even though they're only about 6% of the county, 6 to 10% of the county. So one of my questions was, okay, what are we doing at this specific institution? We're about to do a whole bunch of buildings. We're about to give a whole lot of money out. Do we have anything to make sure that we're not just doing status quo? Are we even thinking about it? So one of the things we did was a small business program. How do we make sure that we are actually making sure that these businesses are subcontracting with small and minority women-owned firms and making sure that they are able to give dollars out a little bit more equitably? So those are some things that we were able to do. And then last year, one of the things we had a school district that got taken over. It wasn't in our specific board. And some other things that happened, and it kind of made me realize, okay, there's more needed. And even being at the very top of the education food chain, you realize there's only so much you can do for students in the classroom. I mean, ultimately, if you go home, if you can read real well, it doesn't matter how well you read if you don't have any lights on. If there's no food in the pantry. So one of the things that I realized was not being addressed because part of the takeover was because they were addressing a lot of poor performances at school. And in Texas, they wrote a law that says even if one school is failing in your district, if you let a school fail for more than 5 years, they can take your whole board over. And ultimately, that's what happened. And that's actually what's going on currently in Houston. And that kind of prompted me, the guy who represented my district was actually one of the authors of that bill. I thought it was a bad bill, and he's actually a friend of mine, which is very interesting when you get into a certain political space, you actually know the people. And I told him, well, I'm gonna have to throw my hat in this race against you. But in Texas, if you're a county official, you can't run against state officials. So I had to resign my seat on the county school board to run against him. Ultimately, he was a 40-year incumbent, so ultimately he was, I was unsuccessful in the run. I will be running again in 2 years. It's not necessarily over, but the point was, there are economics that need to be addressed. And for whatever reason, people are talking about a lot of school issues, but ultimately they're masquerading. When you look at, once I realized that the school district, the schools that were getting dinged in our school district, it had the zip code that feeds that one, and the school right next to it, they cited, had the lowest life expectancy in the county, had the second lowest income in the county. And nobody seems to be putting those two together. This is an economic issue. You're addressing, this is a school issue, and I agree that there should be more done in the school level, that you should put more resources into the schools that have higher needs. But ultimately, the schools can only do so much. And that is the issue that I still am working on in my individual capacity now. But ultimately, that's the issue I think that needs to be addressed. And that's the issue that needs to be addressed more generally. A lot of times we talk about education, but we don't look at the child outside of the classroom. So those are some things that I was able to experience as a policymaker. And then I guess I didn't put that, but yeah, also I've had, ultimately I'm a public servant in all regards, but yes, I've been on a city and state level. And it's giving the thing about, there's a private sector which you make a lot of money, which is great. And trust me, go ahead and make your money, because somebody needs to fund your policymakers, I promise you. When you run for office, you do a lot of begging and say, I need money, I need money, I need money. But working in my capacity as a public official and the public sector has done a number of things, including helping me forgive my loans for student loans, which happened last year. I don't know about y'all are not necessarily, but when you owe $80,000, somebody says, by the way, you're good. Oh, your balance is now zero. You're very appreciative. So so those are things that are important to me. So all that being said, here are my points to you specifically as you consider your journey in public service. I want to make sure that a lot of times people, when you think about these things, you think about history, you think about all these things, you're thinking about what have they done, what's going on. And my point is, there is a power in you. Remember, I had a student of mine that she came to TSU and she was basically saying that, she was a little disappointed. She had went to a majority school in undergrad, and she was at TSU. She was like, I was expecting to come here and see Black excellence, and I was expecting to see all these things. And then, okay, I was like, okay, that's fine. I was working with her on her independent research paper. And then when it was due, she was late. And I was like, well, you do realize Black excellence starts with you, right? Like, the whole, you're looking over here for the excellence, but the excellence is really you that I'm expecting. And yeah, she got a little embarrassed, but ultimately that's the point. That is the point as an educator. The whole point is to make sure that you realize your potential. And my point of whatever policy, whatever irritates you, whatever thing that you're interested in public policy for, it all starts with you. Remember that, like you are the star of that story. And you can address things. A lot of times people want to fix the whole world. That's fine. At some point, I'm sure you will be in a position to fix the whole world, but at some point you can start anywhere. You can start on your own school board. You get irritated at school policies. Even as a student, you can actually make those differences right now. So just remember, it all starts with you. And a lot of people, unfortunately, in this country, I don't know why we all put our focus on the top of the ticket. We always look at the president. We always look at the things at the very top of the ticket, but ultimately, you may or may not ever meet the president, but I guarantee you, the mayor or the people, the city council members like we have here, you will see them in the community. And the lower it is on your ballot, the closer it is to your front door. Like that school board member affects the kids. Like, so those school board members in your community, they're making policy. If you guys are in school, are you in high school? Everybody, okay, so high schoolers. So all those policies that are made for y'all in school, they're made by people in your community. So make sure that you actually, if you don't like what's going on, if you can't vote yet, tell the people to vote for somebody else. If they don't hear your demands, but make sure that they know. But you actually have access to those people, which is a little different than when we think at the top of the ticket. We think about governors and presidents and things like that. So make sure that you actually affect change there. And my biggest point to young folks too, because sometimes when I used to teach, people would say, well, I don't know if I want to vote or things like that. Well, I was like, well, these policies that are being made by people like me, they're gonna affect you longer. Like if you guys are like somewhere between 15 and 25, so you guys are at least 20 years younger than I am. That means that whatever's going on, whatever policies are made, that means you have to deal with at least 20 years longer. So that means you do not want to wait until you start paying taxes and realize, wait a minute, I don't like the way these policies are set up and I'm getting taxed. So you want to make sure that you do what you can. Things like global warming, they're gonna affect y'all longer than it affects us. It's hot now, but like, 20, 30 years from now, if it's even hotter, y'all gonna say, well, we're just virtually melting. So what do we need to do to make sure that we do something about it? So make sure that you play your part. Also, action. We just recently celebrated Juneteenth, and Juneteenth is a holiday that is a Texas holiday. When I moved from Chicago to Texas, I was always confused. I was like, well, and I think a lot of people confused. They say, well, they're celebrating the fact that they got this news 2.5 years later from that slavery was over. I mean, that's cool, but why are they celebrating that? And the biggest thing was, I think the part that most people miss is that it wasn't just the news that arrived, it was an army that arrived with the news. That meant the action came. So it was great that they heard, okay, yeah, it was great that they heard the news, but the army actually came into force, and that was the biggest celebration. So the celebration came with the fact that there was an army that came with it. As a matter of fact, a lot of people don't realize that most of the army that came were also officers of color. 70% of those officers were officers of color. And then my last point is time, the importance of time. So time is your most valuable resource. It is the thing that you can never get back. You can make $1 million tomorrow, and you can make $20 million. You can lose it and replace it anytime, but you can never replace another second of your life. So with that, just make sure that you use your time wisely and use other people's time wisely as well, especially when you're dealing with people who are making positions of authority. If they take their time to spend with you, you make sure you put it to use. And speaking of time, I just appreciate you for taking your time and hearing my story. And these are the people who I got a chance to thank. I thank them. I always thank them because they're the ones who let me come and bring my time to you. So, but thank you for your time, and thank you for allowing me to be before you. Thank you.
I think that was quite an inspirational speech, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, Attorney Norris. We appreciate you coming and celebrating our opening ceremony. Well, we have come to the end of our opening ceremony. Words cannot express how moved I am by today's opening ceremony at my alma mater, 40+ years ago, in case you did not know. And our president and CEO, Dr. Palani Lucas, is also an VCU Walter School of Government, earned her PhD here, and we are very proud of her. We want to thank Dr. Guten and Dr. McNewell for your support. We're most appreciative. We're looking forward to the future as Policy Pathways Incorporated continues to develop future policymakers who will change the world forever. We encourage our young policymakers and influencers that you are to stay the course, keep the faith, and dare to dream big. On behalf of our President and CEO, Dr. Lonnie Lucas, and our Board of Directors, which includes me and our Delta Powers, we thank you for your time and good luck to all of you young scholars. Dr. Lucas.
Welcome, everyone. It's good to have you here today. We are honored by your presence, those of you who are online and also here in person. We're now going to transition to our policy forum. So we will be bringing our panelists up, and we'll have 2 chairs. We have Professor Keogh here. He's our moderator. So we'll just take a few minutes and transition, and then we'll open our policy forum.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our Public Policy Forum. This is a forum of the Summer Academy for Policy Leadership and Public Service. We are here because of young people who are passionate about making change in the world, and young people who desire to learn in our world with increasing information at their fingertips. Young people who are thinking differently about the way policy has been made and thinking about new approaches to policymaking. And we need to hear from them. So we have our Summer Academy participants, both here in person and online. And we are delighted. So on behalf of the Policy Pathways Board of Directors and our administrative staff, I want to welcome you. We are honored. This is our 5th year hosting the Summer Academy for Policy Leadership and Public Service. This is our first year being in person. So we've had to be a little patient with the technology, but we're getting there. So today, our theme is death in custody, the implications of accountability and transparency for the criminal justice system. And you're going to hear about data. You're going to hear about the importance of data in policymaking. You're going to hear about the uncounted. You're going to hear about those who are counted. And what I want you to remember, that as we talk about death in custody and who's being reported as dead, I want you to remember about the lives lost and the families who have lost loved ones, the mothers who have lost children, whether through natural causes or unnatural causes. They've lost their loved ones in custody. Last year, I lost my son in custody. And so I am in that group. I'm a mother who has mourned the loss of her son, who passed away too early in custody. And so I'm looking forward to you hearing more about our panelists, and I'm looking forward to you learning about a topic that you probably would not have even thought about. Because I didn't until I lost my son. So this is an important topic. It's very contemporary, it's urgent, and we have different perspectives on this topic here today. So I just want to thank you and say we are honored by your presence. And I would now like to turn it over to Dr. McDougall.
Thank you so much. I will give that to Mr. Kehoe because I am usually very loud, so microphone isn't needed. But it is my privilege to join you back up here again and to introduce my dear friend and colleague, Chuck Kehoe. Mr. Kehoe has had a correctional career that began in 1964. He's worked in the juvenile justice setting and in adult corrections in 4 states, and has been the director of 3 agencies within the correctional arena. He served as an advisor for the United States Army, the United States Navy, and the United States Marine Corps as it relates to military correctional affairs. He has had experiences in both the public and private sectors within the correctional field, having nearly 60 years of experience in which he's investigated several death in custody cases, and has been an expert witness in 28 legal lawsuits surrounding or involving conditions of confinement, sexual assault, and inmate abuse. He has toured correctional facilities not only here in the United States, but across the world as well, visiting many correctional facilities in other countries. Mr. Kehoe is our colleague as an adjunct faculty member here in the Wilder School in our criminal justice program, one of our most popular faculty, I must say. He holds a master's degree in social work from the University of Illinois, has a certificate, is certified in correctional executives, and is certified in the ACA accreditation as an auditor. He has served 2 terms on the Virginia State Bar Disciplinary Committee, is the past president of the American Correctional Association, and has served on numerous ACA committees and held numerous additional ACA leadership positions. He has published a multitude of articles in professional journals and in books, and in 2007 received the ER-CAS Correctional Achievement Award. With that, I give you Mr. Chuck Kehoe.
Thank you very much. I just want to tell you how impressed I am that you young people are here. That's really impressive. On a Sunday in the middle of summer, even though it's 105 outside and we're in shade and cool, I get that. but seriously, one of the things that I've been thinking about over the last many years is, like any other profession, those of us in criminal justice are really hard pressed for finding qualified people who are interested in doing the work. And a friend of mine who passed away a few years ago, who was a futurist, said, the problem with corrections today is that we are recruiting people when they get out of college 4 to 6 years after they already made their decision about their career path. What we need to be doing is to reach out to the young people who are in high school and early in their community college careers or their college careers, and bringing them into the fold. Otherwise, we're not going to be able to sustain a qualified workforce. So I'm so impressed that you're here, and I really, I'm sure I'm speaking on behalf of our panel. We are really impressed by the fact that you are so good about doing it. I also want to make a little pitch for public service. Next August, this coming August 15th, I will be starting my 60th career, my 60th year in this business. I started as a juvenile correctional officer in Illinois at a maximum security juvenile facility. And after having worked there for about 3 weeks, I thought, this is what I want to do for the rest of my life. I love being around young people. And a lot of these kids have had some really challenging times in their young years, in their tender years. They've seen a lot of violence. They've seen a lot of death. We didn't know about PTSD back in 1964, but when we reflect back on it and you think about the kids that I saw, then I realized a lot of those kids were suffering from PTSD. I don't think there's anything that you can do in this world that's better or more productive than working in the public sector. Working as a public servant, it's the greatest title you can have. And we have 2 of our distinguished colleagues here who are exemplary in being public servants. Just to tell you a little bit, in my family, we have been largely public servants. My wife is a retired teacher after 40 years of teaching. Both of our daughter-in-laws are teachers. Both of our sons are in law enforcement. One's retired now. He's now working as a park ranger. Our other son is still in the police department. I've worked most of my career in the public sector. I don't think there's anything you can do better than to work for your government. And again, I point to my 2 colleagues here as proof of the great contributions that they make. So again, thank you for being here. We hope maybe when you leave and you think about this, you'll think about, well, when I go to VCU and I want to take a track, I could think about the Wilder School, which is just an outstanding school in public service and public administration. And, you have outstanding faculty here. It's a privilege for me. It's one of the greatest honors I've had is to serve as an adjunct faculty member at VCU. I get to rub elbows with some outstanding faculty people. And most of all, what I love is being around the young people. You inspire me. You give me a reason to get up every day. So again, it's another great indication of public service. So let's talk just a little bit about what we're going to be talking about today. What do we mean by deaths in custody? Deaths in custody refer to people who have died, and we'll talk about some of the reasons for that, at some point between the time that the police officer says you're under arrest and the time they are paroled out of an institution or released from a jail. Now that takes in a wide range of opportunities for good things to happen and not good things to happen. So people can get killed during the arrest process. They can commit suicide as part of their intake process. They can be murdered in a jail or a prison. It happens in almost everything you can think of is an opportunity where that tragic event can happen. Many years ago, I investigated a suicide in Illinois where a young man who was going home for Christmas break from Quincy College in Quincy, Illinois. He and his friend went out and had a few beers. They were 21. And on his way to the train station, back in those days, we didn't fly much, we took trains. There was a Christmas tree attached to a light pole, and he unscrewed one of the light bulbs to take it home to his folks. That's kind of a joke. Somebody saw him, they called the police, he was arrested, he was put in the county jail. The jailer, there was one person in that county jail, one employee, who was deafer than I am. And I'm totally deaf in my right ear, and I got a hearing aid in this one. This poor man couldn't even hear that well. And as the inmates screamed and yelled to try to get his attention, because they were watching this young man take his socks and tie his socks around his neck and then around the bar and hang himself from his jail cell, the other inmates who could not get to this young man watched him die. So, those are the kinds of things that can happen. And I can tell you more stories as well as our panel. So what do people die from? Well, people die in institutions from medical issues. A lot of times the people who are the clientele of the criminal justice system have not enjoyed good health care. They have not taken good care of themselves. They've been involved with drugs and alcohol and other things, that some of the things that poverty brings on, the lack of medical care. They are people who have died of suicide, like I just mentioned. Some people have died of homicide. I've investigated a few of those cases. Sometimes people die from accidents. There's a fire, they're killed in the smoke. There are people who die in institutions because of negligence on the part of staff. And there are people who die in institutions because of what we call deliberate indifference. Do any of you know what deliberate indifference means? Anybody know? Well, in a nutshell, deliberate indifference means this. It means that the authorities of that facility knew or should have known that something bad was going to happen, and they failed to do anything to stop it. That's what deliberate indifference is. It's different than negligence. Deliberate indifference means, yeah, I know that's a risk, but I'm not going to worry about it. I didn't intervene. People die from that in institutions. So where does this happen? If you want to look at the criminal justice system, there's all sorts of ways that you can describe institutions, but it's basically, there are federal prisons and jails in this country. There are state prisons in this country. There are local jails. There are local juvenile detention centers. There are local state operated juvenile correctional facilities. There are public and private facilities. There are community confinement facilities, and there are police lockups. So when you take that number in, you're looking at probably over 5,000 different institutions in this country. One of the responsibilities that we have is to protect the people who are in our care. That's our responsibility. So we need to, sorry about that. So we need to do that, and we need to do that well. And that's what you're going to be hearing about today. All right. I'm going to introduce all of our panel first, and then we'll get into our discussion. So let me just get the resumes here. I can do it this way. All right, so our first presenter today is going to be Dr. Jay Aronson. And Dr. Aronson is the founder and director of the Center for Human Rights Science at Carnegie Mellon University, where he's also a professor of science, technology, and society in the history department. Dr. Aronson's research and teaching examine the interactions of science, technology, law, the media, and human rights in a variety of contexts. For the past several years, he's been focusing on deaths in law enforcement custody in the United States. He has recently written a book titled Death in Custody, How America Ignores the Truth and What We Can Do About It. And it was published by Johns Hopkins Press. He co-authored that book with Dr. Robert Mitchell, and it examines the history of efforts to counteract official government ignorance on the issue and propose a variety of practical solutions to the lack of data about how many people die in custody each year. Professor Aronson also maintains an active interest in the use of digital evidence, especially video and human rights investigations. Previously, he spent nearly a decade examining ethical and political and social dimensions of post-conflict and post-disaster identification of the missing and disappeared in collaboration with a team of anthropologists, bioethicists, forensic scientists that he assembled. He's also been involved in a variety of projects with colleagues from statisticians and political science and conflict monitoring to improve the quality of civilian casualty recording and estimation in times of conflict. Professor Aronson received a PhD degree in the history of science and technology from the University of Minnesota, was both a pre and post-doctor fellow at Harvard University, John F. Kennedy School of Government. After our second speaker will be Dr. Darwin Fishman. He teaches at the Department of Political Science and the Department of Multicultural and Gender Studies at Chico State University. He has his PhD in American Studies from the University of Maryland at College Park, an MA degree with an interdisciplinary studies from San Francisco State University, a BA in sociology from University of Victoria in British Columbia, Canada. He has numerous publications. I won't go into all of those, but one of them is titled "Tarred and Feathered Again: Racial Attacks on President Obama That Provoke, Disappear, and Fester Cognitive Press, From Misunderstood Apathy to Radical Engagement, How Race, Gender, and Sexuality Influence Contemporary Youth Policies." He's also written a number of journal articles. Dr. Fishman has worked as a lecturer of sociology and African American studies, taught courses in sociology, political science, criminology, and African American studies at Western Illinois University, Temple University, and Storybrooke University, and University of District of Columbia, and the University of California, Riverside. Dr. Fishman is currently the co-chair for Continuing the Conversation, and he is also one of the co-founders of the Racial Justice Coalition. He's also served as a board member of the Community Review Board on Police Practices for San Diego and is second vice president for the Juvenile Justice Commission for the County of San Diego. Our next presenter is a person who I've admired for a number of years, but she was much younger. I've been older than you for a long time, but Delegate Dolores McQuinn is somebody I knew when I came to Virginia in the late 1980s. And she is a native of Richmond. She's been a trailblazer in local and statewide politics, serving as a member of the Richmond School Board, the Richmond City Council, and since 2009 as a member of the Virginia House of Delegates. Delegate McQuinn, a champion for those who have been marginalized and underserved, patron since 2009 legislation, isolation and recognition of American cemeteries. She's an advocate for locating African American history in the Commonwealth. She was the chief patron of legislation that created a commission to study the impact of slavery and its long-term impact on African Americans in Virginia. That commission is charged with producing a comprehensive report to the General Assembly that includes suggestions and recommendations which would remedy some of the disparities documented by the commission's study and research. She chairs the Richmond Slave Trail Commission, which I'm sure you have heard about. It's received international attention, which presented a platform creating a national slavery museum and the genealogy center to the city's historical Shockoe Bottom district. Through Delegate McQuinn's leadership, the commission has been successful in securing $21 million in state funding for the project. She also introduced legislation to establish the Virginia African American Cultural Resource Task Force in 2017. The legislation established a bipartisan, statewide task force to help identify, promote, and conserve Virginia's Black cultural resources, especially places connected to Virginians born into slavery. Delegate McGuinn was a chief patron of the Crown Act, which made Virginia the fourth state in the country to pass a law which prohibits discrimination based on natural hair styles and textures. As a longtime advocate for addressing food insecurities and food deserts in Virginia, she successfully championed a bill that created the Virginia Food Access Program and Investment Fund, which will help to provide healthy and affordable food for all residents in Virginia. She also took part in the groundbreaking and historic 2020 legislative session, where she served as the first African American and the first woman to chair the House Transportation Committee. Delegate McGuinn most recently co-patroned the Deaf in Custody Act during the 2024 legislative session. This significant law requires every law enforcement agency and correctional facility to report to the Department of Criminal Justice Services certain information regarding the death of any person who is detained, under arrest, or in the process of being arrested en route to being incarcerated or otherwise in the custody of such law enforcement agency or correctional facility. And our final presenter today will be a practitioner's practitioner. Dr. Antoinette V. Irving is sheriff of the city of Richmond. I will tell you this right now. She's probably the only sheriff in the United States that has a PhD degree. She's one of the few female sheriffs in the United States. There aren't very many. And again, she's the only one who has a PhD degree. So you are seeing somebody who has a very unique background. So the sheriff has over 450 sworn and civilian staff members. She's a proud native of the city of Richmond, a product of Richmond Public Schools, where she learned the values of respect and discipline. Despite growing up as a child with substance abuse and domestic violence in Creighton Court, public housing project in Richmond, she viewed life with no obstacles or boundaries. As a basketball standout, she was named to both the Armstrong Kennedy High School and Shaw University Athletic Hall of Fame. She was the first woman to be promoted to the rank of major in either the Henrico Sheriff's Office or Police Department, where she spent 26 years. Sheriff Irving's focus is on establishing a culture of excellence at the Richmond City Sheriff's Office by focusing on professional development of the staff, establishing strong community partnerships, and equipping residents of the City of Richmond's Justice Center with the resources they need to prepare themselves for successful reentry into society. She is a strong proponent of education and youth development, founding AVI Foundation. The foundation encourages young people to develop strong values, self-esteem, self-reliance, character, and discipline. Ladies and gentlemen, it's my privilege to introduce you to your panel, and we will begin with Dr. J. Aronson. Dr. Aronson, take it away.
Thank you so much. It's a real pleasure to be on the panel with so many amazing people, both in academia and practice and in government. It was inspiring to hear the biographies of the people who I will be sharing the stage with over the next couple of hours, hour and a half or so. I'm going to share my screen. So just give me 1 second here. Get to the front. Okay, so can everyone see my screen? Yep. Oh, I can see that you can see it. Great. Okay, cool. Hold on 1 second. All right. So I was really going back and forth about how I was going to structure this talk. Typically, I give about a 40-minute talk where I do a mix of doing kind of big public policy, high-level conversation, and then some more grounded stories about people. Because I only have 20 minutes and because I want to make sure that there's plenty of time for questions and conversation, I decided to cut a lot of stuff out. There will be one story that's very relevant to those of you in the room because it's a very local story. It takes place very close to where you are now. So I just wanted to begin by laying out the big problem that my friend and co-author Dr. Roger A. Mitchell and I discuss in our book, Death in Custody, How America Ignores the Truth and What We Can Do About It. And that's that we have no idea how many people die in law enforcement custody in the United States each year. We have numbers. Some states are better than others. Some jurisdictions are better than others in reporting. But every single count that we have is an undercount. And this is not a problem that is impossible to address. It's not a problem that is something that we just couldn't do even if we wanted to do it. And so the big argument that we make in the book is that this is an intentional outcome of policy decision making. So there are people in power who actively decide that we don't really want to know how many people die in custody for reasons that we can talk about at great length in the Q&A session. But there are ways of knowing how many people die in custody. And what Roger and I try and do in this book is get us to a place where we can use systems that already exist to actually know how many people die in custody. Just wanted to give you a sense of what's in the book, because this is a massive topic and we're really only going to scratch the surface. The one thing I want to point out to you is that we begin this book with lynching. I was initially resistant when Roger was, when we were talking about what the book would look like. He was insistent that we start the book with the topic of lynching. I resisted because I did not see, or I didn't think that extrajudicial killing and the kind of deaths that take place within the criminal legal system, the judicial system, were directly related. I worried that we would kind of misrepresent the issue and that it was best not to go back to that point in history. There were several reasons why I was wrong. Roger said, listen, go do some research and come back and tell me if you still feel that way. So I did, and I realized that we could only start this book with lynching for multiple reasons. The most basic one is that with lynching, there was also an active effort not to know how many people were dying at the hands of lynchers. And it was only through the work of families of people who had been lynched, of journalists, of human rights advocates, that we had a sense of how many people were dying. The other thing that really stood out to me is that the practice of lynching declines in the United States, particularly in the American South, but also in the American West and in other parts of the country as well, as the kind of racist, violent policing that we are familiar with today really ramps up. So as police forces begin to control the color line, as they begin to keep certain populations in check, particularly immigrants, labor activists, and Black people in this country, the need for extrajudicial killing decreases. The other thing that really surprised me that I think is important to keep in mind is that as the number of lynchings begin to decrease, the number of people who are sentenced to the death penalty and who are actually killed through capital punishment increases. So you can kind of see, if I had more time, I would show you a graph. The number of lynchings are going down, and the use of the death penalty, particularly in the South, but also in other places, is going up significantly. And so one of the first questions, and I'll just, this is Roger. This is Roger when he was the chief medical examiner of Washington, D.C. When I met him, we met in a meeting and just kind of struck up a conversation and hit it off. And now he's one of my best friends, and he would be here today, but it's his 50th birthday. So he's with his family celebrating. But one of the first questions that he asked me, or one of the first things that he told me when we started talking, the first day that we met, he said that he wanted to know who the Ida B. Wellses of death in custody were. And that harkens back to this idea that lynchings were meant to be done to send a message so that people knew what happened, but that there would never be accountability. And I'll show you in a few slides that the official death investigation system went to great lengths to cover up the ability to actually determine at a legal level who was responsible for the lynchings and to hold them accountable. So Roger says to me, Ida B. Wells, a journalist who some of you may know and some of you may not, was living in Memphis, Tennessee, and there was a lynching in her community, and she began to investigate the problem, and she realized that she had no idea not only how many people were dying of lynching, but even what happened. So as a journalist, she began to keep track. She began to keep records, and she actually published a tabulation for 1892 and 1893 of lynchings that took place throughout the South. And so you can see there's not only the similarity in terms of not wanting to know, but also in the lack of data and people coming in and trying to find data, because the first step to solving a problem is actually knowing how often it takes place. And so the legacy of Ida B. Wells is really the legacy of our work and of Roger's work over a very long period of time. So Roger's been involved in all of this stuff since 1999 when he was a young medical student. He's been active on the issue of deaths in custody since then, and is really a thought leader in how we can capture these deaths and how we can prevent them. Once Ida B. Wells begins to collect data, other organizations step in and begin to do this work as well. So you see the Tuskegee Institute and NAACP both keeping track of the number of lynchings that are taking place. One of the main reasons that the NAACP gets involved in all of this is because the chief justification for lynching in most places where it happened was that a Black man had raped a white woman. And so in addition to actually counting the number of lynchings that take place, they look at the reasons why people are being lynched. And it turns out that rape or sexual assault is not the main reason. Things as simple as, they looked at me wrong, or they stole from a white business, or they got into an argument with a white person and threatened them. So you can see that lynchings outside of the official formal law enforcement structure are happening for reasons far beyond the stated justification that you often heard for why lynching had to take place. And this was happening in the era before formal policing, before the kind of policing that we know of today, before the professionalization of policing. And so we see this effort to figure out how many people are dying, why they're being lynched, and this count becomes a way of reducing the number. So once you have a count, you can work towards reducing it each year. We also see, as I mentioned, a long history of coroners, of medical legal death investigators actually covering up murder. There were many instances of coroners being delivered bodies by the lynchers, and the lynchers saying, "Hey, we murdered this person because they were being held in the jail, and we removed them from the jail and we strung them up on a light post, or we shot them, or we burned them because of this reason." And the coroner would say, "Well, we have no idea who did this, and we don't know how it happened," because the lynchings were taking place in the name of the community. And I think that in many cases, you see deaths in custody happening, and the general public, to the extent that they know about it, feels like this is something that had to happen in order to keep us safe, that there was no other thing that could have happened but this, because the role of the police, the role of jails, the role of prisons is to keep us safe. And this is actually something that you see that continues on to the present day. So Roger asked me, who are these Ida B. Wellses? And as a historian, one of the things that I did was I actually went and looked back in history to who was trying to tell the truth about people who were dying in custody, and to try and find out who they were and what happened to them. And so we began in the 1950s with the work of the Congress of Civil Rights. I'm not going to get into the details of this particular organization, but I will say that they brought a petition to the United Nations charging the entire United States government with genocide against Black people. There were lots of reasons why this particular case didn't really go anywhere, in part because there was not a clear genocide taking place. There were not that not every single member of the U.S. government was implicated in crimes against Black people, and also that this organization was tainted by associations with communism and leftism at a time when that was not a good thing to happen. So then we go on and we look at other efforts. If Roger was here and he was on Zoom, you would actually see this book, Stolen Lives, on his bookshelf. Stolen Lives is an effort of community activists, of families of people who have been killed by law enforcement or through interactions with the criminal legal system, to actually know who they were, to know who their stories were, and to have them counted as being killed by, these are all people who have been killed by police. We look a great deal at the importance of journalism and the role of journalists in counting the number of people who have been who have died in the criminal legal system, either have been killed or have died because of poor medical care, because of poor mental health care, because of negligence. So for lots of different reasons. And in 2015, two major newspapers actually undertook efforts to count the number of people being killed by police, because our government, the US government, was not doing the job that they should have been doing. And I'll get into some of the legal stuff and the public policy stuff in a second. There's also an organization called Fatal Encounters that takes a broader look at the number of people killed during police interactions. One thing I like to just remind us is that even after Ferguson, after Freddie Gray, after Daniel Garner, after all of these cases, after George Floyd, the number of people who die in interactions with the criminal legal system, to the extent that we can even know what that number is not going down. I don't know what I haven't looked at the 2004 numbers for a bit, but we can see here in this graph on the right, you can see that 2023 was at least as measured by the Washington Post, was the year with the most number of people shot by police, and this is a very particular database since they had been keeping track in 2015. So the problem is not getting better on its own. In Pennsylvania, we have no good estimate or even no good count of people who die in law enforcement custody, because the reporting mechanisms that are supposed to be in place at the state level are not. They're just not there. They just don't work, in part because though the federal government mandates a report, in theory, of the number of people who die in prisons and jails to be sent to the federal government each year, there's no enforcement mechanism, and it's an infuriating story. Why? But in an effort to make up for this lack of information, the Pulitzer Center for Crisis Reporting gave a grant to two friends of mine, people who are now friends of mine, Josh Vaughn and Brittany Haler, to try and figure out how many people died in Pennsylvania jail. So this is only about county jails, different from the situation in Virginia. All of our cities are in counties or are counties themselves. So we have county jails. And one of the things that Josh did when he began to look at deaths in custody in the COVID era, which is when Brittany started to look at them as well, was that he was hearing about deaths in jails that were not in state records or were not being reported to the federal government. And so this got him curious. And so they started doing some digging, and they realized that there was a story there. And so they applied to the Pulitzer Center for a grant to actually try and figure out how many people had died. One of the main things that they discovered was that because of the way that death in custody reporting laws are written, if someone dies outside of the jail, then you don't need to count it as a death in custody. So if someone is in the throes of a drug crisis, or has attempted suicide and wasn't able to complete suicide but was not going to survive, they would the jails would either give them compassionate release, would remove bond requirements. They would go to a judge and say, you know, we need to get rid of the bond requirement so this person can be let out, so they don't die on our records, on our watch. They would be put in hospital, or they would have the charges dropped at the very last minute. So there were lots of cases where people were dying as a result of their encounter with the jail, but those deaths weren't counting as jail deaths because of these loopholes in the way that death in custody reporting requirements were written. So I don't know what the Virginia law looks like, but I hope that there is part of the law states that deaths that occur after a certain period of time, when someone is released, are still counted as deaths in custody. So whether it's 24, 72 hours, 30 days, it's really important that we actually know how many people soon after they are released from jail, because one of the main reasons why people get released is because they're about to die and the facility doesn't want anyone to know about it. So this reporting has been amazing. And for 2022, they found around 65 deaths, about 2/3 of which were known by the government. So 1/3 of those deaths were, for various reasons, not known to the state government and not reported to the federal government. And so if we are going to try to reduce the number of people who are dying, whether it's in encounters with police, in jails, prisons, immigration detention, on parole, we need to have the full data set of people who are dying, because we could be missing a lot of really important information if we only have 2/3 of the data about people who are dying. A story that we tell in great detail is that of Mike Masterson. I don't have time to tell it here. Suffice it to say, he was interested in the issue of death in custody for much of his career, and he ended up doing a lot of work on this issue, and ultimately ended up influencing the creation of what's called the Death in Custody Reporting Act. He worked with Bobby Scott, who's someone who those of you who have been around a while know well, representative in your neck of the woods. And so Bobby Scott had been interested in this issue for quite a long time. And one of the things that Mike Masterson did in 1995 was, as someone who was a native of Arkansas, he was able to bring a group of Republicans on board to support this legislation, because Mike Masterson believed that death in custody was not a political issue, that whatever your political persuasion, the fundamental role of government is to preserve the right to life of all people, unless there are very good reasons for taking it. And that when the state, meaning the government, was directly responsible or played a role in someone's death for reasons of democracy and accountability, the public should know about it, and that those institutions or organizations or individuals should be held accountable in some way. So this piece of legislation gets introduced in 1995. It sits for 5 years, and then it gets passed in 2000 in the aftermath of the Amadou Diallo and killing and Abner Louima abuse in New York. So there's this moment where we're talking about death in custody and police violence and police brutality. So this law gets passed, and it mandates the creation of an infrastructure for collecting information about deaths in custody by the Bureau of Justice Statistics within the Department of Justice. I'm not going to bore you with the details. This law had a 5-year sunset, so it was supposed to be reauthorized after 2006. It was not reauthorized because the issue had kind of receded from public consciousness. This was just after, this is the war on terror era, where law enforcement was seen as needing sometimes to go to to get chalk on its toes or to get chalk on its cleats. You go right to the line. And so there was less desire to hold law enforcement accountable at the domestic level or at the international level. But because jails and prisons and correctional officials saw the data as valuable because it gave them a rough sense of how they were doing, at least at a state level compared to other states. The Bureau of Justice Statistics kept collecting the data. The law eventually gets reauthorized in 2014 largely because of the events in Ferguson and Baltimore in 2012, and so this issue is again in the public consciousness. So the law gets reauthorized, which means like a second version of the law gets put on the books. And it's passed and signed into law in 2014. Unfortunately, one of the things that happened when this law was reauthorized was that there was a penalty added to the law that says if you are a state and you didn't submit the data that you're required to submit, you would lose 10% of your funding for something called the Burn Justice Grant. It's just money that comes into the state for criminal justice work through the federal government. That unfortunately was seen as a law enforcement act. So if you don't do something and you get penalized, that's law enforcement. The Bureau of Justice Statistics is not allowed to collect data that's used for law enforcement purposes. It's only allowed to collect data about law enforcement, about crime activity, about the number of people in prisons and jails, but that data can't be used to penalize anyone or to hold anyone accountable. It sounds very inside baseball-y, but what it meant was that the Bureau of Justice Statistics could no longer collect that data, and the collection of the data had to be given over to the agency within the Department of Justice that actually provides grants, and that agency had zero statistics expertise. And so the quality of the data and the data collection kind of fell off a cliff. And one of the things that happened was that states that had been complying were like, if nobody actually knows what they're doing and nobody's paying attention to what we're doing and there's no one there who knows whether we're telling the truth or not, why should we even bother to submit data? Why should we even bother to like worry about whether it's complete or not? So the quality of data fell off a cliff. And BJS was basically barred from continuing this work. And so we're in a situation now where the federal data that is being collected under this law that's on the books, everyone knows is terrible. And there's a whole story about efforts to fix this. I don't have time to get into it, but there have been efforts, they haven't succeeded. But I have heard that the BJA, the Bureau of Justice Assistance, which is the grant-making agency, has been able to contract Bureau of Justice Statistics to help them. So we may be getting better data at some point in the future. Why does this matter? I just kind of bored you with a bureaucratic story that was either a mistake or intentional. Nobody really knows. But because this data, even though we didn't get, the Bureau of Justice Statistics wasn't collecting, wasn't publishing data that you could use to determine who was dying in a particular facility. So it wasn't broken down by facility, but at the state level and in aggregate, you could see big trends that if you were interested in reducing the number of people who are dying, you could make policy changes. And if you were an advocate, you could say, oh, there's a real problem in Louisiana or in Virginia. We need to dig more and we need to try and get records of who's dying so we can figure out what's going on. One of the things that we see over time, so 2019 was the last year that the Bureau of Justice Statistics actually collected data, and then there's a lag in reporting. But you can see two things happening: major increases in the number of people dying as a result of drugs and alcohol, and we can ask why, and also suicide. Both of those things are happening in the broader public as well, but jails and prisons are supposed to be secure facilities. When you go into a prison or jail, you lose your autonomy, and it's the responsibility of the facility to keep you alive when you're not able to make decisions for yourself. This is not a problem that just Roger and I have noticed. John Ossoff, a senator from Georgia, has held hearings on this matter about the fact that federal government is no longer collecting reliable data on deaths in prisons and jails, and what we can do about it. Can talk about that if you're interested. Roger really has a solution, and I'll tell you about that in a couple of minutes. But I just wanted to go back to something that Chuck said. So custody begins we argue that custody begins from the first moment of contact with police. So as soon as you are no longer free to leave a situation, you are you're not fully in custody, but you're in the process of being brought into custody all the way through release. So this is a continuum. We don't really see a big difference between what happens on the streets and what happens in carceral facilities, including in immigration detention facilities, because as an individual, your liberty is restricted and you no longer have full agency and autonomy. The other thing that I wanted to mention was that you can see here that the number of drug and alcohol intoxication deaths is going up. In my local jail, the Allegheny County Jail, several of the recent deaths have been people who are in drug detox. And so one of the things that we can see, if people are consistently dying in the process of drug detox, then maybe there's a problem with our drug detox procedures that we need to fix. If the people who are dying in that context are let out of jail, have their charges dropped, are brought to the hospital, and we don't count those people, we don't know that there's a problem with our drug detox processes and procedures, and so no changes are made. So that's why we need to know all of the people who are dying in custody. Don't have time to go over this, but there are 5 manners of death in the United States. Medical examiners and coroners determine both cause and manner of death. So the cause is, what actually caused someone to die. And death certification includes what type of death is this? There are 5: natural, homicide, death at the hands of another. So homicide does not imply intent. Accidental, if you kill someone and you don't intend to, that's still a homicide. It just might not be criminal. Suicide, death at one's own hands. Accident, unintentional, and that often includes drug overdoses. And undetermined. So undetermined is a manner of death where you can't decide on any of the 4 distinct categories. It might be unclear whether someone died as a result of an accident or suicide. So you leave the manner of death as undetermined. There are lots of cases, though, where police or law enforcement officials have been heavily involved in the individual's death, and the person who's certifying, the coroner or the medical examiner, will still use the undetermined cause to deflect culpability and to deflect responsibility from the people who are actually responsible for that death. So we argue that death in custody is not just a legal matter, it's a public health matter. Why? Because mortality is at the very tip of a much broader set of factors or of harm and trauma that happens within our criminal legal system. Mortality is just something that's obvious. So you won't always know if someone is being abused. You won't always know if someone is receiving poor healthcare, if there's negligence involved. It's usually only when someone dies that we even have a sense of something happening in the society. And so you can use mortality as a proxy for lots of harm and lots of bad things that are happening that wouldn't normally get counted. And so when someone dies, it's an opportunity to really investigate the system, because most of these deaths are systemic, and to make changes that have a massive impact on the lives of people who don't die. So we know that time in prisons and jails actually reduces your life expectancy for lots of reasons: diet, environment, stress, trauma, and the like. And if we can use the deaths that occur as an opportunity to really investigate the system and to scrutinize it, then we can help people who will leave prison or jail or an interaction with law enforcement. So we see it as really important to use deaths as an opportunity to save lives. So you can see this is a kind of cycle where we assess what's going on, which is why we need all the data. We develop policies, we ensure that those policies are being implemented, and then we continue this cycle of assessing what's going on. So that's the kind of policy change, the theory of policy change that that Roger really holds. I've honestly become more of an abolitionist, and we can talk about this as well, as I've gotten into this. So I don't know that we can reform the system in the way that the standard policy change model takes place. So I know that I'm running out of time, and I've gone over that. What I want to leave you with is that we have an amazing system of vital records collection in this country. It's not perfect, but two things that every person, every American gets are a birth certificate and a death certificate. And we use the death certificate and the birth certificate to collect information that we think is important from a policy perspective. So we are advocating for the addition of a death in custody checkbox on the US standard death certificate and adoption on state death certificates, so that we don't have to depend on the government or on the law enforcement system to police itself. We don't think that that's the best way of doing things. When Roger was the chief medical examiner in Washington, D.C., he had the death in custody checkbox added to the D.C. Death certificate. D.C. is one of the reporting entities in the United States, mostly at the state level. New York City, Washington, D.C., and some of the outlying territories have their own death certificate. So this is a great way of capturing these deaths in custody that we can go back and look into more once we have this signal. Roger and his colleagues are in the process of doing an investigation of the efficacy of the checkbox. They have 9 years of data before and 9 years of data after. And we know that this actually dramatically increases the recording of deaths in custody. One thing I just want to mention is that getting a second opinion about an autopsy or a medical legal death investigation is quite expensive. It can cost up to $10,000 or more. I assume that most of you there recognize Colin Kaepernick here. He brought light, he shed a ton of light on the issue of death in custody with his kneeling during the national anthem when he was with the San Francisco 49ers. He has been blackballed from the NFL, but he has used money that he's gotten from various sources, Nike, legal settlements, to create Know Your Rights Camp. And they will actually pay for second autopsies in major cases for people who can't afford it on their own, when they feel like they want someone to look into the death of their loved one in the context of the criminal legal system. Roger is the medical director. And one recent case was of a man who died in Fulton County Jail in Atlanta. And the family and their lawyer asked Roger to do a second autopsy, and the results led to the Justice Department investigating the conditions in that jail. We have a podcast. We're starting season 2. I know that I'm at the end of my time. I just wanted to make this issue. This is the last thing I'm going to say. I wanted to localize this issue for you. That right down the road from you, this jail is apparently closing, but right down the road from you is the Hampton Roads Regional Jail. There's a case of Jamichael Mitchell, who died a horrible death there. And the characteristics of this death are similar to so many others: mental health, lack of care, lack of systems in place to check on people. And it's a death that we can talk about, but it's really very similar to so many others. This death and several others led to multiple investigations, and from what I understand, this jail is about to close. Whether it actually closes, I don't know. But within each death, there's a systemic story that we can tell. So I'm going to stop there, and in the Q&A, we can kind of go back to anything that you want to go back to. So thank you very much. And Darwin, I stopped sharing if you want to share your screen.
You want to begin? Dr. Fishman, can you hear us? Can you hear us?
I can hear you, but I don't think he can.
Yes, I can hear you.
Oh.
No, you're Dr. Fishman.
Okay. All right. Thank you. And I will not need share screen. And thank you, Jay, for your presentation. Very powerful. Taking notes. Darwin Fishman, he, him, his, with the Racial Justice Coalition of San Diego. And sorry if there's noise in the background here. I'm in my garage office. Bring greetings from sunny San Diego. And I think my presentation will work well with what you just heard, micro, macro. I will take on the part of just sharing a little snippet about San Diego and matches up with these national trends. Let me also start with personal grounding and share with you that I spent time when I was 19 years old. I was arrested and I went to jail. And, given what we're talking about with in custody deaths, I have a really deep appreciation for this subject. Even though it's not my area of expertise, it starts for me on that personal level, because I remember being, as a young adult, being in a Santa Cruz County jail, and that sense of that complete loss of control. It's out of my hands. If the people running the facility, your life is in their hands. And the other part, which we know about a certain level, but it is true that it is a psychological warfare. They mess with you. They mess with the inmates, who's in what cells, who's not there. So the conditions are also really horrible. And I was in one of the better jails at that time, and this was late 1980s and the 1990s. And I was there for political protest demonstrations as a student at UC Santa Cruz. Then later, I also spent time Oakland jail and San Francisco jail as part of protests demos. So I did want to say that for way of background. And then I've also have experiences with cousins. I had a cousin that also died in custody, Richmond, California. For our neck of the woods, San Diego, I'm part of the Racial Justice Coalition of San Diego that me and my partner, Buki Domingos, we started about 7 years ago. And our first campaign actually was chokeholds. We were successful in getting a ban on chokeholds for the city of San Diego and the county. And then we found out that San Diego was the largest city, over 1 million people, that did not have a ban on chokeholds. We were the last major city to get that ban. And of course, it was pretty quickly after George Floyd and the protests, of course, that we had here. With that, let me say this for in custody deaths. We just did an event on the 3rd-year anniversary of a state audit. And so I'll cut right to the chase for San Diego. And I really thank Dr. Lucas for including us in this, in our national notoriety now, which is San Diego in 2022, we had our record in custody deaths, and it was 20. And that might not sound very remarkable, but context, of course, means everything. For San Diego, that sad achievement with the 20 in custody deaths, it actually meant we beat out Rikers Island. We had more in custody deaths in 2022 than in Rikers Island. They have a larger population in their jails in San Diego. San Diego, the rate of in custody deaths actually beat out every county in California, including LA, San Francisco. San Diego is the 2nd largest city now in California, but our prison population is still relatively small. The issue, of course, again, is the in custody deaths. And all the reasons which you've just heard with the presentation, Aronson, is fits for San Diego. Let me start with our special quirky characters, add to this. Sheriff Gore has retired. He was sheriff for over 20 years here. Republican sheriff, former FBI agent, was one of the FBI agents responsible for Waco, Texas. And it's like you can imagine the ingredients that you mix in to be able to get to the point where you have the kind of in custody deaths that we had to get completely out of control. And the other thing too to really emphasize is that this is jails. This is not prisons where we're talking about these in custody deaths and the high rate. And again, so many of the folks that have died in San Diego had not been sentenced yet. Some have not even gotten in front of a judge. Some of them, it's within 24 hours of being put into jails. The other thing too, I want to say, I also should say by way of background for this, I serve on boards and commissions. One of the ones I served on was a CRB, Community Review Board on Police Practices for the city of San Diego, that looks at civilian oversight of all complaints. And I've also served on the Juvenile Justice Commission for the county of San Diego. So I have some also insight for this. The sheriff's department runs the jails here, and the civilian oversight of the sheriffs is through CLERB, Civilian Law Enforcement Enforcement Review Board. So let me give that by way of background. When I said the part about the 2022, the in-custody deaths, and I'll focus on this, and again, my comments will be short, open this up for discussion, but I want to highlight this. This came from the California State Auditor's Office, and they said, and again, it's substantiating what we already knew. Those of us activists, organizers have been working on this, but it's that thing of getting the validation and through state government in this audit report, independent audit. 185 in custody deaths in San Diego County jails from 2006 to 2020. And that at least 150 people died directly or indirectly because of the way the jails were operated and maintained. They were very critical of the sheriff's department. They were very critical of CLERB, the civilian oversight, and they left off, which was really glaring, also the district attorney office, district attorney. District attorney, I want to add to this. I talked about Sheriff Gore. The other thing that's really critical for this, and again, what's going on locally is the same for the national trends. It's not just that you have the in custody deaths and incompetent sheriff's department. You also have to have people sleeping at the wheel for the oversight. So civilian oversight, if you have that, if it's not doing its job, then again, it makes in custody deaths much worse. And then district attorney, official government response, if they're not doing their job, then again, the message is really clear for law enforcement that they can do whatever they want, especially again for jails. For the district attorney, there's a report that came out in 2019, San Diego Union Tribune, our local paper, saying that in 25 years that they looked at, there were 450 people that were shot. No one was prosecuted. No one was prosecuted by the district attorney. So basically all 450 people that were shot, lethal, non-lethal, it was all valid. No problem here. As part of that, that also meant all the deaths in custody, no one was prosecuted. The DA has a perfect record. No one had been prosecuted. We've only had one prosecution now for someone using lethal force, an officer, and then we've only had now a nurse and a doctor prosecuted for a death in custody. In both of those trials, they were deadlocked. Jury was deadlocked, so charges were dropped. And it obviously begs the question: if you match up the numbers, if you have 185 in custody deaths over a 15-year period, is it only in 2024 that you would find that there's one doctor and one nurse that are bear any responsibility for any of those deaths? Like, none of them in that sense are homicides. None of them were because of policy violations, so on and so on. So that's the background, what we're dealing with here in San Diego. The Racial Justice Coalition of San Diego, we have two campaigns. One is SLICK, Saving Lives in Custody, that we started in 2021 formally. And this is directed at the Sheriff's Department and in custody deaths. I say formally because informally, we've been dealing with the sheriff's department since we started in 2017, RJC, but formally looking at the in custody deaths and how that's been out of control, spiraling out of control, again, reaching the peak with 2022, the highest 20. So that's leaving lives in custody. The other one campaign that's equally important, of course, is directed at the district attorney, which is prosecute or resign. And that's really critical because we have a district attorney, of course, and the sheriff that work very closely together. And their actual response, one of the things that they've done is they've have this thing now formally for any deaths, whether it's in custody or on the street, that that agency that's responsible for it will not investigate it, the other one will. So the sheriff department has a homicide, there's a shooting, they will send in another police force to investigate it. Surprise, surprise, they're not going to get any different results. And that's a big part of the problem. Let me just add this one quick story about this to really hammer home this point. It's not rhetorical flourish. The one person that's been prosecuted by the district attorney, and again, this 25-year period, it's out of the 25-year period now of the report, but the only person who's been prosecuted for lethal force, Sheriff Department Deputy Aaron Russell, he killed Nicholas Bills. Nicholas Bills was arrested, was about to be processed, going into the jail, found a way to get out of the car, escape, was running away. The officers were chasing him. This officer, Aaron Russell, they were so surprised that he got out of the car and was running away. And this was someone that they had picked up because they believed he was homeless and was acting strange, like there was mental health issues. So they're chasing after him. This officer, as reported in the paper, the press, was this apparent and obvious, had his lunch in one hand and pulled out his gun in his other hand while he was chasing him, shot him in the back multiple times and killed him. That's the only officer that's been prosecuted by the district attorney. And it goes without saying, you really obviously as a district attorney couldn't let that go. It gets worse. They prosecuted him like a suspended sentence, like something like 6 months and then out. We just now got the federal government intervening to prosecute this officer, Aaron Russell, because he's been released. And I think it was less than 6 months he served. So part of this, then you get at the culture, because obviously this is not in policy, but the culture of sheriff department, district attorney. And then when you get to how the jails are run, it's like the open secret. It's a throwaway population. Not only in that sense do they not care, but they know in a certain level, if anything does happen, whether it's intentional or not, they're going to be exonerated. There's no discipline, there's no firing, and there's no prosecution. There's nothing illegal that's done. And that's why it's these different levels and why it's so difficult for us to address this. The other key part for this, where San Diego really, really deeply connects, of course, to these national trends, is who's going to jail. And so I did want to wrap this up. I want to share a quick story. When I was on the CRB, the Community Board on Police Practices, one of the things I liked the most actually was the ride-alongs with the police. It's very revealing. I did ride along with a gang unit. I even did a thing with a helicopter unit. But the one, of course, that ended up being the most revealing, and this was not intentional, Western Division, Clues the Beach, and other areas in San Diego. It just so happened as a rookie cop. And normally when you get the ride-alongs, you get almost like a PR person to make sure you see the right stuff, because they know that CRB were eyes and ears for civilian oversight. But I was very blessed to have an experience with a rookie cop, a tall white guy from Arizona, new to San Diego. And he's very nice. We had great discussions. Almost 100% of his 12-hour shift was spent directly or indirectly with a homeless population. And it's not a stretch. Nuisance call at 7-Eleven, suspicious packet put in the alley, constantly going from call to call. And San Diego has this thing where you have a whole lot of police. It's almost like this swarming. So typically when he comes on the scene, he might be the first, but other officers will come there. They're literally openly talking about, like, this person sitting there, I don't know if this is mental health. I don't know if he's homeless. I don't know what's going on. So sure enough, they got this call at 7-Eleven. I think this is emblematic of exactly what's going on and crystallize all these different issues and problems. Got a call for 7-Eleven nuisance call. He gets there, then other officers arrive. Again, they're having this discussion about, well, what do we do? And the more senior officers are like, you know what? I don't want to be called back here for the same guy in an hour. Let's take him in. Let's detain him. The rookie cop gets him, take him back for processing. And this is the key moment. The rookie cop gets on his computer and he's looking at this guy. He finds his name finally, and he finds out this guy that was the nuisance at 7-Eleven was there making loud noises. Couldn't tell. It looked like he was on house, also potentially mental health and or drug addiction. He finds this guy had been arrested over 100 times. And you can just see that he becomes crestfallen. Like the officer's like, this is it. This is my fate. This is what I'm going to be doing. He realizes this guy's going to be out days, week, and he'll be called again. And it's not obviously unusual for them to know their frequent flyers by name. This obviously is a population that's not served by jails. It doesn't make any sense for them to be put in jails. The officers, beat cops on the street know that. And it's also why it connects to the in custody deaths. If you're putting these people in jail, the people on the street, the officers, as well as the ones that are working in the jails, have zero interest in this population. They're not trained for it. They don't like it. They don't want it. And you can see that. That's why a lot of the folks that we're getting for in custody deaths are ones that have not spent much time in there. Some are as young as they're in 20s and 30s. Some of them have diagnosed mental health issues. Some of them have drug addiction. It's very clear. And the jails are the absolute worst place for them. And we can see it. And then it also compounds what we already know. They're more likely to be poor, working class folks that are in there, and the racial disparities. Our population for on-house community, African Americans is over 20%. Our population of African Americans is like 5%. So all of those issues about racial disparity are just compounded more, and then it's produced, and then things like the in custody deaths. So Racial Justice Coalition, we were connecting with our partners like LA Justice Coalition, Care First California, and Jail Death Coalition to work on these issues locally as well as statewide. It's really critical. Last thing, also, I need to continue to have a conversation with Dr. Aronson, because one of the things we're literally working on right now, AB 2531, and we're not primary on this, we're supporting Assembly Bill 2531, is how to define in custody deaths. And it's all the issues you just raised. And the whole thing about the resistance from the Sheriff's Department and police about is in custody deaths just going to be considered something in jail? Do we include, the Sally port? Do we include the car? So that's a real issue. And then the other thing too, which I don't begin to understand, but as far as I can tell, not every county in California even has the same standard for when they report in custody deaths. So the state numbers don't necessarily even match up. There's not necessarily even a central place for the state of California. So I understand if we're having that issues on the local and state level, yeah, nationally, that's got to be a huge mess. So I'm looking forward to working with you on this, because it would be nice to get some sense of where places that have done this and worked this out, and move us along that path. So this is a really timely discussion and really needed. Thank you. I will stop there. And again, open and available for questions as we move forward. Thank you.
I just wanted to very quickly say before the panel starts that that Darwin told the story of Jamichael Mitchell. Jamichael Mitchell was a poor guy with mental health issues who was picked up for taking a bag of chips and a Pepsi from a 7-Eleven and ended up dead a few weeks later. Had been in jail multiple times. Didn't comply with instructions because he was not mentally capable of doing so. And rather than getting the care that he needed, he was basically left to self-combust and die.
Right. And one other thing with that too, about the data with the in-custody desk, what I believe Paul also connects with is we can't get the data on folks, the frequent flyers, like people that have been in jail, arrested over 100 times, because I'm sure there's a direct correlation with that too, in that if you're being arrested that many times and you're in jail that many times, it's a much higher percentage, of course, likelihood that you're going to die in custody too.
Go ahead, delegate.
Good afternoon. I'm just delighted to be here, and I certainly want to thank Professor and Dr. Kehoe for his introduction. I have been knowing him. It's been a long time since I've seen him. It's just so good to see you, and you continue the great work that you are doing. It is indeed a pleasure, again, for me to be here among this distinguished panel. I feel like I don't even have much to say now after these two gentlemen have gone forward, but also any other elected officials that are here, and particularly to the students. We are so extremely proud of you, and you all have been very attentive. I don't think I was that attentive when I was your age, so I just want you to know that. To the, policy pathway board members and to other community leaders, thank you. Then to Dr. Polani, thank you so much for your visionary leadership. It has been extraordinary and amazing, and I so appreciate you and the work that you do. It will pass on and move on and go through generations. So thank you for being who you are and the work that you've done. To Sheriff, to see you as well. Just talking about, and I was going to speak on a couple of things. I wanted to speak on the death in custody reporting of 2013 with my good friend who was offered up to introduce my good friend Bobby Scott, and it became law December the 18th. All of that has been shared with you today, and so I wanted to explain that or articulate what that particular piece of law on the federal level, what it did, and then how it correlates with what we were doing on the state level. And basically on the state level, the bill that was introduced just piggybacked on what Congressman Scott had done on the federal level. It was called, again, the Death in Custody Reporting Legislation. Mine was introduced, was House Bill 423, but there was another young lady that introduced a bill as well, and that was House Bill 611. Both of those bills were basically what we patroned were doing the same thing. And so what I did, rolled mine into the work or into the bill that she had in place. Doing that process, and this came about after having conversation with Dr. Polani and many other individuals about moving this forward, moving this agenda item forward, death in custody reporting. And so we concluded that it was extremely important for the state of Virginia. And so as we, there were many questions that was raised by, particularly by a law enforcement representative who advised me, we're already doing that. And it's being reported by jails and correctional facilities. However, that was not entirely accurate. Yes, the Virginia Board of Local and Regional Jails requests the data, but it is only presented at the institutional level. And we needed full transparency. We need full accountability. And so the passage of the legislation allowed us to do just that for our families and for communities. Many families were not receiving information when something happened there or what led to their loved one's death. And I know that as a legislator, that was important to me, and it was important to the constituency. They would come and talk about it. You have heard these conversations year after year, for absolutely forever. People wanting to know why certain things had happened, why it was not reported. And so the Commonwealth of Virginia, my colleagues, understood how imperative it was that the value of data transparency and accountability. And so as I rolled mine or incorporated House Bill 423 into 611, it was passed this year, 2024. So it is now in place, and it was signed by the governor. He made some, he amended it a little bit, but however, it passed. And that was important, because we can always come back and then do an amendment to make the bill better, to make the process better. What does it do? So House Bill 11 wants the data presented at the individual level. And so now the information will become digitized and placed even online so that the information is readily available for public access and greater transparency again and accountability. We wanted to move beyond the paper document reports. And so in seeking to utilize this data and to improve the protocol and procedure, but also digitizing, it would make it available to any and everyone. And so there'll be the students, academia, governmental entities, and would all have access for research purposes now, but for this information. The bill also required that every law enforcement agency and correctional facility to report to the Department of Criminal Justice Service certain information regarding the deaths of the person who is detained under, and I want this to be very clear, and this they're doing it on the federal level as well. But any person who is detained, under arrest, or in the process of being arrested, en route to being incarcerated or otherwise in the custody of such law enforcement, the agency, or the correctional facility. And there was a lot of discussion today, I think by Dr. Arison, on that particular information. The bill provides that any law enforcement agency or correctional facility that fails to comply may, at the discretion of the department, and this is something that's probably going to need to be fixed a little bit or tweaked, at the discretion of the department, be declared ineligible for state grants or funds. The bill also requires the department to analyze and submit the data to determine how such information can be used to reduce the number of deaths. And that is the ultimate objective, is making sure or trying to reduce the number of deaths of people who have under the law enforcement have lost their lives. It also examines the relationship, if any, between the number of such death and the action of the management of such law enforcement agency and correctional facility. Finally, the bill requires that the director of the department to annually report the findings and the recommendation resulting from analysis and interpretation of the data to the governor and to the General Assembly and to the Attorney General, beginning on July 1, 2025, and each July 1 thereafter. And so I guess in a nutshell, that's what this bill is going to do. And so it brings us closer to a place where this information is being analyzed, and make sure that it's being reported, and making certain that people have access to it. I wanted to share one thing with you, and then I'm going to turn it over to certainly Sheriff Irving. We talked about in a lot of discussion today on, death, about the issue of suicides in jail, death and suicide. One of my localities reported, and this was reported by the sheriff, is that more than 1 in 4, which is 25% of death in our jails, are suicide. Assuming the correctness of that adage, that suicide is an irrational act. This data then underscores the seriousness of mental health crisis in our jail. And this is a problem for jails all across the country. This issue was recently addressed by, and I'll tell you the county, Chesterfield County. According to Leonard, he said an estimated 70% of Chesterfield's inmate population is composed of people with mental health issues. Additionally, he claims nearly 30% of the county's inmates have serious mental health issues, mental health illness. While we do our best to help those in need, we are not properly equipped, staff trained, or funded to be a mental health institution. And housing them in a jail is not the best course of action for them that only serve to exacerbate an already bad situation. This needs to change, and it needs to change quickly. The board far too frequently reviews depth in which the jails fail to properly recognize or obtain timely and appropriate treatment for an inmate suffering a mental health crisis. And so as we talk about that, many times we talk about jails that confine individuals, and there is death in custody because there was a police officer, there was a sheriff, there was something that happened. But there are many ways that individuals are succumbing to situations, and certainly mental health issues are one of the bigger issues as well that we are dealing with. Thank you.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for having me. I think we've gone through all the pleasantries of thanking all the people, and I know our time is getting short, but I wanted to jump right into just picking up where Delegate McQuinn just ended with mental health. And then I want to talk about addictions and how all those things and medical issues take part in the deaths in custody. Not giving anyone an excuse for what happens. However, Sheriff Leonard has already said, and many other sheriffs said as well, that mental health is a large issue within facilities. Many facilities are not equipped to handle those issues that come about. One of the things that we've done here in Richmond is I've hired an additional staffing, my own licensed professional clinicians, to ensure that outside of the medical provider that we pay to be there, that those individuals are on site and able to try to deal with some of the issues and concerns that individuals currently have. It's a large issue, and when an officer, as the doctor said earlier, when an officer continuously goes to 7-Eleven or Wawa to remove the same person over and over again, because nobody wants them to stand there or be there, or they're begging or they're asking for something, and they become a so-called public nuisance. What do we do as officers to assist them? And it's up to us to find a place for them. What we do at our facility when people come to us, and unfortunately we have to wait till they come to us, or if they just happen to wander into our facility, they'll come to the front door and say, we need help. What we do is we have a whole reentry team. I have 15 people on my reentry team that are there to try to find someone mental health help, substance abuse help, or substance addiction help, or substance disorder, or just housing. Poverty plays a lot to do with how people react to society. Poverty, housing, unemployment, medical, mental, and substance. These are the types of things that we are confronted with every day. And when we talk about deaths in custody, those are the elements that individuals are also confronted with. We have individuals that have so many comorbidities or already medical issues when they come in that we may not know they have them until something happens to them. Or they finally get into a position that they're willing to give us that information. Some of them we know because they come frequently. So we're able to help them quicker than we would if a new person comes around that we don't know what their medical conditions are. Deaths in custody are very unfortunate. They've been on a rise more since the pandemic. Maybe because all of these laws and rules and the gentlemen that we just heard are paying attention. It's unfortunate that people don't pay attention until it's someone close to them. It's someone they know or someone that lives in their community. And that's unfortunate because there are people that we all see every day that we don't pay attention to unless what? They get in our way or they're a problem for us, they're a nuisance for us. But it's our responsibility in the criminal justice system is to try to connect them with all the resources that they need. And it's difficult because of funding. And we're always going, and I'm sitting beside a delegate, we're always going and we're asking for more funding, and we're asking for this and we're asking for that. In the past few years since I've been a sheriff, we've won over $6.5 million in grant funding for the individuals in our institution. To try to put in place those things that are needed to reduce the probability, not eliminate, but to reduce the probability of things such as deaths in custody. And that's our responsibility. I'm a different type of sheriff, as they say, because I live in these communities. I've grown up. Delegate McQuinn was someone I looked up to, and I still do, live in my neighborhood. And we've gone through all of these types of people that people call nuisances. And as a sheriff, I feel it to be my responsibility to do what I'm supposed to do to reduce the probability of deaths in our custody. We have a lot of people that are sick. We have a lot of people that have mental health issues. What do we do about it? The officer that picked up the young man at 7-Eleven, he looked in the computer just to see who he was, but was he able to look in the computer to find out what institution he could take him to instead of taking him to a jail? And when is that going to be looked at? How many people are going to fight for that to happen instead of continuing to blame the officer or the institution for not doing what they're supposed to be doing? We're not equipped. We do the best we can, and I'm not making any excuses. But what I am saying is when people come with problems, with issues and with concerns, we need to be able to reach out to those resources within our communities, whether near or far, to place those people where they need to be. We have officers now that if we do happen to find somewhere for a person to go to for a mental health crisis, that we have to send them not right here in Richmond. We're taking people to Southwest Virginia. We're taking people hours and hours away, and we have sheriff's officers that are driving past each other from one jurisdiction to another to take someone somewhere to find help for these individuals. And how many days does it take for us to find a place to get them help? The first day that we need help is not the day we're going to get to give them help. It can take 3, 4, 5, many days to get people assistance. And if we get them a temporary detention order for a mental crisis, if there is no bed to put them in, guess where they stay? They stay in jail. And we have to watch them, care for them, and do everything that we can for them on the mental side and the medical side, as well as the substance side. Because often all three of those things are a combination of what we have to deal with inside the facility to help a person to survive. And when we release them, if they get bonded, and bond now is less of paying for a bond, but where do you have to go when you get out? And if a judge says, we don't want to hold this person for this minor crime, and they don't have a home address, where do they go? What do we do to assist them? And I know they're talking about death after custody, and did the in custody contribute to the out of custody death? But it was still an in custody death. Was it? Or was it a pre-custody death from all the things that attributed to that society within itself to include advocates that have not done prior to the incarceration of an individual? What do we look at that standpoint? We need a culmination of all the resources in our local, state, regional, and international level, to include federal, to how it is that we can reduce, again, the amount of individuals that may succumb to a death while in custody. We're trying to put all the pieces in place to provide assistance. But if you are also, what we're doing is trying to give persons resources, and even when we take them to an outside resource, they don't want to be there once they get there. And they walk away because they can. Then that individual comes back into the community, and then whose responsibility are they to receive the resources that they need? We ourselves within the facilities, we need the resources. Our police officers need the resources. The individuals need the resources. And to include the family members in what's going on, we need to make sure that the family members are truly equipped with all the resources they need to help the individuals within their home, if they're still attached to their family members. Because a lot of people that we deal with are no longer attached to their family members, unfortunately, whether by choice of theirs or whether by choice of their family member. Because just like the person at 7-Eleven or Wawa that made them to be a nuisance, family members also get tired. They get tired. And unfortunately, what happens then? What happens then? But we need to figure out, how do we place all of these resources together to be able to reduce the in-custody deaths? Whether it's when they're in the vehicle, whether it is when they're at the processing, or whether they're inside the facility. But do you continue to incarcerate a person that needs other assistance? No, that's what we should not do. Do we incarcerate people that have health issues? What are those health issues? We have people that have cancers and heart diseases and all of these things, you name it, we get them. We have all of those things. And who pays for this? We constantly have to deal with Medicaid, Medicare, health insurance. Who's gonna pay for these items that individuals need in order to be healthy and to be well? And will they ever be healthy and well again? And the local board of regional jails, they do a pretty good job. I know in my agency, I communicate with them often. I'm not sure about other facilities, but we communicate often. And as people say, I know you because I see you on TV, but I don't know who you are. Because we're constantly trying to have that conversation about what really happened. And I've been in this business for over 30 years. And I've been taught that when there's an injury, an illness, or a death, you got a couple seconds to let somebody know it happened. We immediately report what happens in our facility. And since being the sheriff, I don't want to say I've been afraid not to, but I'm afraid not to. I want to make sure that they know as soon as possible. I will call them on the phone and I will send them a report, just an immediate report. And then after the initial report, we will do a whole report, because it's no telling when it can happen. We'll call them in the middle of the night. But we want to make sure that they know something has happened. And I think a lot of facilities haven't done that, and it's a trust issue. But as we know, that went all the way back to slavery and lynching. As to how long this has been going on the way that it's been going on. And until we get the appropriate people in the appropriate places that are not going to tolerate some of these things from happening, they're going to continue to happen. Those things that we can't control, we can't control. But we do the very best that we can to try to make sure that we can do what we have. Unfortunately, since the unrest, since the pandemic, this is the job that very few people want. It used to be a time when you see a police officer, I want to do what that person does. Now it's, I don't wanna be. We had someone to ask us a question, and I believe it was the Attorney General. He asked the question, how many law enforcement officers in the room? And it was a bunch of us. And he asked about how many of you have kids and how many of you are talking to your kids about doing what you do. How many of your kids are asking you about what you do and they want to do what you do? The room got quiet. How do we change that? How do we motivate you all to want to do what we do and be able to be the difference and make the difference? Because it's a time that we have to stop saying all of us are not bad people. But when can we get enough good people to continue on in this profession to assist in some of the things that are going on? Whether it's excessive force or response to resistance, whether it's deaths in custody, whether it's any of those things, we have to now change the narrative. And I try to change the narrative with what you see. This is how I try to change the narrative, because she put a narrative in place for me as a kid. So now it's my responsibility to dictate what that narrative is by people that look like me, come from where I come from, and have been through some things in life, are in a position now to say, I want to be able to do those things to help people and be able to position them a little bit better. And I understand all the research that doctors doing behind me. I understand all the research that they're doing, and I'm thankful for that. It keeps all of us on our toes. But when we're advocates, let's make sure we're advocating in the right direction and making sure we have the totality of the entire picture of things that are going on. Because none of us know everything, but we need each other in order to do a better job. But custody and death have increased. The deaths in custody has increased, and we need to do a better job of what we can do to fix it. What can we do? Starting here, starting now. We have a summit quarterly now, and we've had over 100 different resources in the same room together. That's what I'm thinking can help. We need to put people in the same room at the same time to collaborate on what you have that you can do to help, what you have, instead of everybody being on its own island. And everybody's reaching for a different resource, but all the resources are already in the room. But what do we do with those resources? And when we can find the answer to that, I think we'll be in a better direction to reduce a lot of things that are going on in our society. And I'm not sure if that's where you wanted me to go, but I'm taking it from everything that was said today. And we all have a responsibility to do better. We all have a responsibility to do better. It's not a debate as to whose fault it is, but the debate should be who's gonna fix it and what are we gonna do as a group to fix it together. I thank you for your time and I appreciate you allowing me to share.
Thank you, brother. Thank you, doctors and doctors.
Take some questions.
All right, we're right at about 2 minutes before 4. I'm gonna look to Dr. Lucas to tell me when we need to cut it off. So, do we have some questions in the audience, and do we have any online?
You have a question online?
Okay. You gonna ask the online one?
Yeah, great. Okay. This comes from Regina Gaines, and she says, Sheriff Dr. Antoinette Irving, you provided some very thought-provoking questions, my apologies. How can society collaborate and secure more resources to address the issues at hand?
Oh, sorry. The other part of the question.
As members of the community, very good question, as members of the community, engaging in the process. Engaging with the resources that are already there. We don't have to recreate or create new resources. We need to tap into the resources that we have. Also, there are many, many groups that are being provided with grant funding and being provided with licensures, but they're not doing the work. And until we can hold each other accountable for those fundings and for that, what they're attempting to do, we have to make everybody do their part. And that's going to be a part of the solution. When we have our next summit, we would love for the games to come. And give her point of view as to why she asked the question that she did. And we invite everybody, and we feed people. So we would love to have as many people from the community to come in, because as professionals, when we have summits and we bring the professionals in, we're answering it from a professional standpoint. We need the parents and the people in the community that are dealing with the things that are going on to come in and say, well, what about this? And how can you help me with this particular issue with my family, my child, or whatever's going on in my community? And that will help us to be able to better provide resources to the community. But there are oftentimes people in the community that's a resource all by itself. Thank you.
Thanks, Sharon. All right, let me bring the microphone over here to you. Thank you.
How you doing? I'd like to thank everyone for being here, and especially the young students. Like, I really came here so you could put a face with this, but to answer that question, because I am someone who suffered because of mental health and addiction. I spent 23 years in prison for addiction-related crimes. I spent 5 years in prison for 2 T-shirts and 5 years in prison for 2 bottles of lotion under old Virginia law when they had a third offense felony. Now, when George Floyd was murdered, I wrote the General Assembly and those laws were taken out of the books. Unfortunately, it was too late for me. I already served a life sentence. But as far as, thank you, Sheriff Irvin, too, because I've been in her facility, and unlike the gentleman who's been around 5 states, I've been incarcerated in 5 states because of my addiction. Over this 30-year journey, I've learned a lot, but I also wanted to find out what happened. So I went back to school and I got my degree, and I wrote a book called Lighting the Way, Hidden Treasures. And I believe pressure creates diamonds. And so there's something beautiful inside of all of us, but the resources to get to that question, because I know we're out of time. So much more I could share on this coming from a personal side, but I really wanted you all to have a face with me. I'm the son of Delegate Mamie Baco, Delegate Quinn's friend. And my mother exhausted all her resources to try and help me. Spending money, sending me across the state, across the country. But what happened was with the resources, just like Tucker's, so I've been in Tucker's a few times, I've been in your facility, but there's the crack epidemic during the early 90s exhausted all the resources. We used to have a lot of detox centers. There's nothing but one anymore. Everything went away that we used to have in the 90s. And so we lost a lot of our resources. There is nowhere for anyone to go with mental health and addiction issues. And she's exactly right. During those 23 years of incarceration, I've seen maybe over 80% of the people in there for either addiction or mental health related crimes. And like, even the drug dealers, because that's a lifestyle of process addiction. So 2 years ago, I published research at Liberty University on children exposed to trauma in underserved communities. And my study was done on children from West Baltimore. And I found that these 7 and 8-year-old elementary school kids would go to school, their fight or flight was on high, they became desensitized to violence, and they found it easier to pick up a pack or get a gun, right? But I've been calling out the American Psychological Association because the DSM-5, which diagnoses people like me, doesn't include lifestyle or process addictions and the substance use disorder. They've been misdiagnosing me for 30 years. They said I was bipolar. They said I was PTSD, but all I was traumatized from abuse and from street violence. But I don't want to hold this thing up. We need to do a lot. You all are the start of it. Thank you so much. I congratulate y'all for being here. Fight for that for the generation coming up. We just got to do that. Thank you for everyone, all the panelists and all the speakers that's doing your thing there.
Okay, we're gonna, oh, great. Come on, look at all these. All right, just keep passing it down.
2 questions directed to any of the speakers we had today. My first of which is, what can we as high school students some of us who aren't able to drive yet, able to do regarding the issue of mental health, death in custody, and even addictions that lead to these issues?
And this gives me an opportunity.
You want to take that?
Give me an opportunity. I'm a Baptist preacher, probably don't need this, but anyway. But it gives me an opportunity to speak to the first question, and this. And I was looking out at you guys again. You were, thank you for being so amazingly attentive to the conversations that was going on. I want, you all have so much to offer. Even at your age, and I just want to say, I started when I was 11 years old at this stuff, 11 years old. And I was already out in the community working, from my church to the community. But you have the gifts and talents that as young people that you have now, it is persons in certain age category, we had never seen the like of it at our age, okay, at that age. And so, I would say, certainly you got to make some noise, be the advocate, find that place in that space that you want to see, you want to elevate or that issue and begin to make some noise. Bring along your other 10 friends and making the noise. Come before the General Assembly, go before city council, local government, and say, you know what? Mental health is something we're interested in. We must put more funding into that area. We must get people off of the street. We must find facilities for those with mental health issues, challenges, as well as addiction. My people will listen. If they know you are serious and that you can affect change and that you can influence others, I promise you, they will listen to you, okay? Thank you, Sally.
And this is for Sheriff Irvin. I had a question regarding what you meant by resources. Did you mean more professional opinions, like actual programs, facilities that people with addiction can go to? What did you refer to as resources that, and how can we as a community help to improve those?
As far as here locally, we need more resources, as we said, that some of the places that we used to have when I was growing up that you could go to for addiction or for mental health, they're no longer here. Funding governmentally was taken out. So there's less now than they were. We need more facilities to be able to house and handle the situation. Meaning not just funding do we need, but we need more young people like you all to put yourselves in those professions. To want to do the work, because right now there are so many jobs that are out there and people don't want. But the jobs in public safety and healthcare, that people don't want those jobs. People feel that it's just too much, that everybody has a crisis and everybody has some type of trauma or something going on, that am I really able to handle other people's issues when I have my own? And we need enough people in these professions. Whoa. We need enough people in these professions that are gonna be able to handle things that are going on. So we know that we have mental health crisis. How many parts of mental health do we have that individuals are willing to be that professional to take it on? Because it's not just one. Right. There's not just one solution to whatever goes on in someone's mind or what somebody's gone through in trauma. There's more than one type of an addiction. How many people is it gonna take? How many professionals? And that's where you young people come in, because you guys aren't afraid to say, or haven't been afraid to say, I need help, or I need you to pay attention to me. You guys are doing it with social media. Oftentimes it may not be the best scenario or the best way to bring it out. However, you guys are willing to say, I need help. This is me. I'm mental health. I have an addiction. I have a problem at home. I have those things, and you guys use social media to translate that to other people, but we need people that are gonna do the work. And we're finding that it's not about how much we pay people either. People just don't want to do the work, and you've got to be committed and willing to do the work. They're talking about the research that they're doing, that's time and commitment, and oftentimes it's not with a lot of money. But we need you guys to want to do that. You gotta want to help your friend. I see my friend in a situation, don't overlook it. Try to help your friend and get your friend that help. And oftentimes in our generations, we've ignored that our friend has an issue, or we've ignored that our family member has an issue. But you guys are getting to the point that you're not ignoring it anymore. And you guys are gonna be the solution to that. You guys are gonna make the difference. And again, I can't say it as much as everybody said, we applaud you guys for wanting to make a difference and be the difference. Change is what you make it, and you are the change.
You know, I just want to say one thing. In the 60 years I've been in this business, the role of the sheriff has changed 180 degrees. You know, people talk about the criminal justice system hasn't changed. All you need to do is look at the PhD woman who's talking about mental health as a sheriff. There's the sheriff, the present and the future. Who's next?
This is a question for anyone, but why do you think the number of in custody deaths increased?
How about if we give this to Jay or, come on, Jay, we want to hear from why is the number of in custody deaths increased, do you think?
Oh, I think that's a very difficult question to answer. I think that the part of the problem is that while we've reduced the overall number of people who are incarcerated, the number of people with mental health issues, drug issues has increased. And I think that as our policymakers have pointed out, the resources that are available that were once available have dried up. I think there's a more general thought that the people who are in our prisons and jails, we as a society, I'm not saying you in this room or us on this call, but as a society, we attribute some kind of moral defect to them, and we feel less concerned or caring about people who we see as a threat. So I think it's partly that. It might also be that we're paying more attention to the issue. So sometimes when we see an increase in things that we're measuring, it's because we're paying attention to it, not because there's an actual increase. But I just wanted to reiterate that your job in here is actually to keep people out of our prisons and jails and to keep them away from the sheriff. The sheriff shouldn't be the one who's called when someone is in crisis. We should have other mechanisms in place. And so we certainly do need police for certain things. We certainly do need prisons and jails for some small subset of the population. But when you go into prisons and jails, you see the vast majority of people there are just people who have been harmed in some way, who don't have the resources to deal with it on their own. Someone calls and then they have nowhere else to turn. And so it's poverty, it's mental health issues, it's the lack of other services. And so I would like to see a dramatic decrease in the number of people who even interact with the sheriff, as wonderful as she is. I mean, sounds almost like an N of one, I would say. There aren't many sheriffs like her in this world. If there were more sheriffs cut from this mold, I think we'd have less of a problem. So I think that's kind of where I'd like to end. I actually have to run, but I wanted to thank everyone for being here. I think it's absolutely amazing that there are so many young people who are part of this conversation. I actually want to reach out to everyone on the panel who I was with. I have lots to say that we didn't get a chance to say. So thank you. Thank you for doing the work that you're doing in public service. Darwin, thank you for doing the work that you're doing. I know a bit about San Diego from Kelly Davis. We've been in conversation. There's a whole story about in California, there was a death in custody monitor. And that at the last minute, there were some changes made to the bill. We could have talked about that. But you really have to pay careful attention to all of this legislation and alternatives to incarceration and to contact with the criminal legal system, and finding more people like the two folks sitting in front of you to be in public service. I think that's a good start. So thank you all. Thank you so much.
Darwin, you want to contribute anything on that last question?
Sure, yeah, thank you. And I also just add to the part about the resources. Another way to go at this, which is, again, it's really sad statement about this, is that quite often the only thing that's left for families, impacted families that lose loved ones, is lawsuits. So San Diego County has paid out millions and millions and millions of dollars to families. So again, the district attorney is not prosecuting anyone. CLRB is not sustaining any charges. So the thing about resources that's fascinating is that, you think about in terms of good government, make a lot more sense instead of spending millions of dollars paying out, you can think of all sorts of things that would be much better use of that money. I'm also on the ATI for the County of San Diego Alternatives to Incarceration, where we are trying to find things like non-law enforcement response to a lot of these calls, as well as if law enforcement is called out, alternatives to jail and processing them. And I just say quick notes, LA has done this. And it actually, one of the ways that this happened came from the police union, which is they offered to stop responding to about 50 different types of calls. And you can see most all of them have to do with mental health and or with the unhoused population. So that sense, there is hope. But I also get the challenge, because if they don't respond to these calls, then you've got to, what services do you stand up? So we have things like a mobile crisis response team. But again, that's just still in its beginning stages, and that has to properly be resourced. It has to have the resources for it, as well as the training in the staff, if we're going to have non-law enforcement responses. So it's the two parts. One is getting a non-law enforcement response, and then standing up other services that can respond. Ultimately, that's going to be cost effective. That will actually save a lot for budget, and we have the resources for it. San Diego, our sheriff's department now, their budget is over $1 billion. So the money is there. There's certainly ways that this can be spent for, and also better ways to spend the money too. Thank you.
Now, I'm glad he mentioned that, because the city of Richmond is trying to do that now.
Yeah.
Is trying to have the non-law enforcement response teams to respond, where we have social workers and police officers and whomever else needs to. And in Northern Virginia, they tried it, and it's about to be working. And we would like to be able to do that in more and more parts of Virginia, but we need to be able to do that in more across the country in order to be able to. Uniforms trigger people that may have something going on with them. So we need to have a softer approach to interacting with an individual when we first touch base with them, so that communication level changes. It's just like the communication level that changes when a police officer arrives and when a sheriff's deputy arrives, because of the rapport and the two different types of rapports that we have with individuals, because we spend a lot of time with them while they're incarcerated. So they build rapport with us. Outside of when a law enforcement officer interacts with them, it's going to be a quick interaction with a quick solution of putting them someplace. So that also changes the dynamic of how they interact and what happens to them at that particular time.
There is also a law that's been put in place in 2018 called the Marcus Alert, where after a young man was killed, where rather than the police officers and all showing up when someone's having a mental health crisis, that there are other entities like or responsible persons from the community, mental health and that would show up rather than an individual, from the police department at all, or they will go there with the police officers so that they can interact with the individuals who have a mental health crisis.
Go ahead.
I first wanted to thank the speakers today for humanizing the situation, because it is very easy for individuals to villainize those who are incarcerated and those who struggle with mental health issues. The question I wanted to ask was, how can we as adolescents directly reach those who are incarcerated and bring attention to the perspectives of those who are struggling with mental health and incarcerated?
You're some of your adolescents only in age.
Okay, all right.
Pretty grown up.
Yes, very much.
As far as you directly communicating with someone that's incarcerated, that's something that's a little difficult, because you are someone's child and you may not be the child of the person that's incarcerated. It's easier for us to connect you with a person that you're related to outside of a person that you do not know. Because there's a lot of, I'll be honest, there's a lot of manipulation, a lot of things that go on inside of facilities that could create some issues for you. However, if in dealing with your professors or your instructors or your teachers, how is it that you can put together different type of programmings or different type of sessions that you all can interact with each other and have those conversations to bring those tools and materials to your instructors. And your instructors can help us with programming for those individuals. Because it may not be the best thing to have those one-on-one interactions with people that you don't know and don't know what's going on with them. So our number one goal is always to keep you guys safe. That's my number one goal. But we want to make sure we can hear from you and understand what it is that you're meaning as to how it is that you can communicate with them to help them with what they're going through. So I would love to be able to have those conversations with you. I'm gonna leave my information for all of you all and see if there's an opportunity for you to come down. You have to be a certain age to go inside of facilities because there are a lot of things that go on in a facility. But just to come and sit with me in my office and have those conversations and let me hear it from you as to what you guys are seeing and what you guys are feeling and how we can change things from your perspective. So I would love to, I'm offering that to you and I'm open for that.
Thank you, Chair.
I would just also add, let me just also add real quickly, because I take my classes, my students on tours. We go to the, visit jails and prisons. I would just recommend that you do it with a group, like through a class or a community organization, because the things like debriefing and then sessions to lead up about what you're going to expect and experience there, I think are really critical. And I can't speak to that area, but I know we have that in San Diego, and that's common to have community organizations that have those kind of relations, as well as also schools. Actually, I also did it when I was on the East Coast, leading tours, jails, like New Beginnings in Maryland.
Okay, go ahead.
Hello everyone. Thank you guys so much for speaking on the panel. I really do appreciate the information that was given today. This conversation has definitely reminded me. I think Delegate Quinn touched on it about the Marcus alert. With that instance when the man was dealing with his mental issues, and he did unfortunately die in custody with the officers. And I do personally know one of the officers, and they were just doing their job at the end of the day, and they were following normal procedures and stuff. So my question is, do you think, besides resources, do you think changing certain procedures and how officers do things and how they deal with these people would also help lower the deaths in custody?
Carmen, you want to take it?
Oh, I'm sorry, that was for anyone, honestly.
Yeah, I'm trying to leave him out. He's so far away, but he's right here.
Did you hear that? Thank you, Bishop.
Yes, yeah. Let me add this part too. So one of the other trends, I didn't mention this before, of course, is the for drug overdose. So almost 100% now, the deaths in custody in San Diego now, they're being reported as drug overdoses. So there is a part about that we have this traditional notion about in custody deaths in this interaction with sheriff deputies. And of course, we know it's much more complicated than that. So Narcan, they made it available. That's just within the last year. But the problem with it now is the press reporting of in custody deaths are always saying that the person got Narcan. And if you just read that, you think that, again, all the in custody deaths are drug overdose. But what we're finding out then from CLERB is when they investigate, there are other factors, quite often other factors going on. And so I say that because it's multiple then. So as a part about training, sheriff's department, medical staff there, and things like with Narcan, as well as also that culture that I've talked about, like valuing the lives. We've had a thing like with suicides, like the checks, the wellness checks, all of that are key factors. Last thing I'll just say for San Diego, and again, I haven't really referenced this, but we just did an event with the law firm, class action lawsuit against the sheriff's department in San Diego, and they're representing 14 families. The in custody deaths this year are at 5. It's very low from our record year 20. We're 6 months in and we're at 5. They take credit for the in custody deaths going down because they say their version is because of the class action lawsuit, the sheriff's department has to make these changes. Otherwise, the judge will rule against them. And that's been the impetus for real change. So that's another example of how change can be pushed, and a significant part of this. For better or worse, lawyers' lawsuits, class action lawsuits are a really key ingredient of this too. And they're mandating things like ADA, the check. They're mandating checks of the prison that are unannounced. All sorts of things they're trying to push, not just this thing about a financial settlement.
And to answer your question from our perspective, yes, training is needed. Yes. And it needs to be continuous. And all the time, we're out there looking for what other types of training can we do. We have to have a willing trainee. Training, it starts with a state of mind. Then it starts with physicality as far as understanding and then being able to do the work. And as I said, we have a lapse in people that want to do this type of work. But every time something happens, unfortunately, is when we notice that this may have been a contributing factor to that. And now we're going to train this way and we continue. It's hard to be proactive in some of the training and you have to be more reactive, but we're looking for innovative ways every day to be proactive, to figure out what training would help. But now that mental health has come to the forefront and there's something that's going on, and everybody's recognizing some of our traumas, then we know that we have to be efficient in that area. We're all taking CIT, which is crisis intervention training and advanced training. We're all taking Narcan training, naloxone. We even purchased a whole new system of helping with overdoses called OPV. We're doing that. What we're doing with our individuals that are in the facilities, and somebody asked us, why are we doing it? We're giving each inmate, each individual that leaves, we're training them how to use naloxone. We're giving it to them when they leave out. They can take it with them. And if their friend or someone that they're with, because more than likely they're going to go back to the same types of things they were doing, they're in a position to be able to assist that person. The thing about using naloxone is they're alive now. They get up and they walk away, but they have relapses. Instead of going to get treatment, they have to get treatment when you hit them with OPV or naloxone. They have to get treatment, but they don't think that. And they can see the person beside them not come back, and they'll go right down the street and do it. So we have to work on the mindset of individuals that are using and are overdosing. And it's like you overdosed, but you didn't die. When I was little, I thought if you overdosed, that was it. But no, I overdosed last week, I'm back. And they look at it like they're invincible. And nothing stops them. And we need to get into that mindset of what's causing that. But it's an addiction. It's really an illness at this point. It's something going on that we as a community need to figure out, and places that we need to have that people can do day treatment, overnight treatment, whatever type of treatment program there is. And people did not realize that alcoholism, we didn't even talk about that. That's one of the biggest killers out there. That's a big killer, not just drugs. That alcohol is a big killer, and we haven't even touched on it.
It's a slow death, whereas addiction could be, that could be just, and you're gone. But can I just say this, and I know we gotta get closed up or shut down, but also the quality of the individual training is so much training is needed, but the quality of individuals that are hired for these positions. I trust Sheriff Irving. I know Sheriff Irving, and someone come and say something to me about Sheriff Irving, I believe I can defend her for in more ways than one. Okay, she's a Christian, one of the biggest churches. She's there, providing security. But you need the certain quality of individuals in this business, those business, sheriff and police department. And so that you truly can, when people call me a politician, I am quick to say, I am not a politician. I am a public servant. And I think there's a distinct difference between a politician and a public servant. And so we need public servants in these positions, because then the humanity exists in them and they are able to quickly see the humanity in someone else. And so as we move forward doing this, and we're going, it's a lot of work that needs to be done. They accomplish a lot, but you certainly need individuals, and Sheriff Urban would tell you that they can depend on, they can trust to get out there and do what is right when people are in trouble.
Thank you, Delegate. We're gonna take two more quick questions because we're past our cutoff hour, we gotta respect your time. So I'm gonna answer, you got one question here, one in the back.
This question is for Sheriff Irving. Even if we have all the resources needed to help solve the problem, I think that what we really need before we start securing resources is a roadmap or game plan that the community and that everyone can participate in so we can see where it's going to. And I feel like if we had a roadmap, then there'd be more investors, more professionals willing to give money to the cause.
And it's not just a roadmap we can throw on the wall and say it's a roadmap, but like I said, that's why we're having those summits, so that we can get people in the room that we can design that roadmap. What's next? What do we need? How do we need to get? So again, I welcome that conversation with you and your peers and any other people in profession that you think. Like I said, we've got over 300 partners that we use at our sheriff's office now. But I said we've had 3 sessions now with over 100 people in the room at one time that's trying to put resources together. Our next goal is to continue to put that roadmap together as to what's next. I'm always into the what next. I was that inquisitive kid that once said, why? What's next? Well, what you gonna do next? And I'm still that way, like, okay, let's get it done. Let's stop talking about it. We keep meeting to have meetings, so let's meet to do something.
Thank you very much to the panel. Wonderful people, great share, great words. I like the village approach, and I agree on that it's a multi-tiered village approach. If you want to compel change. I was impressed when I took a tour of the jail, impressed with Major Purchase and Sheriff Irving. Without hesitation, I feel very solid about them. When people talk about change, policy and procedure oversight and review, an authentic CRB. I know that Sheriff Irving came under a lot of fire. And I think sometimes when somebody wants a go-to guy, it's got to be a truthful narrative rather than an entire city pointing a finger saying, go get that person to lift responsibility, a share off of them. Very impressed with the jail, their offer of, if we have church groups who want to do programs such as art, we would love that to help lift people as they exit on out, because you've got to go somewhere. When I left the protests of 2020, 2021, doing as much as I could to shift and stabilize real bad judgment that would absolutely lead to lockup and potentially loss of life. I rolled into the homeless meals program. Some of the protesters wound up there, homeless, and with multiple arrests. So I became their wingman as well as the regular crew that was out there. I learned a lot. The homeless guy would be locked up for trespass and disorderly repeatedly. So I became even a closer wingman, curbing fighting, making sure that they were on the homeless list to get a place to live. A lot of the guys just got their new places out on 360, and they can afford the $200, but it takes that village. And we have to be able to speak up. You have warriors like Noble Princess Blanding, amazing veteran educator, and she pushed Marcus Alert tirelessly. And I remember what she went through. You have wonderful people on legal aid like Wyatt and Eli. It's a village approach, and it takes courage, because when you start getting hit, whether you're an Eli, a Wyatt, a Princess, or a Sheriff Irving, you've got to have people to circle up around you and say, I know you, I believe in you, I'm gonna keep an eye on you, but I believe in you and I will back you. Otherwise, you've got the shouts of fire, fire, usually from the shiny, where it's not valid. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I just want to mention one thing. You know, in 1967, at the University of Illinois, Chicago, where Mr. Norris's mother was. The Jane Addams Graduate School of Social Work started a program called the Police Social Service Project. And they put graduate level, master's degree level social workers assigned to police departments in Wheaton, Illinois and Naperville, Illinois. Because they felt, those two police departments felt the same thing you heard about today. That police officers are trained to enforce the law, they're trained to handle security situations. They are not the mental health experts, and they put the social workers to ride with the police officers. So, this is, some things keep reoccurring. Question is, we need to be able to keep funding those kinds of things.
Yes.
So I want to thank our panel, Jay and Darwin and delegates Green and Quinn and Sheriff Irving, and of course, our organizer, Dr. Lucas.
I want to give a hand to our stellar 2024 cohort. Outstanding. This is an outstanding group of young people who are committed. And it's just, we are honored to be in your presence today. And also, yes, Drs. Irving, Dr. Aronson, Dr. Fishman, the Honorable Delegate McQuinn, and Professor Kehoe, thank you so much for an outstanding panel. Let's give them all a hand.